we also have a special presentation in front of us here. So to kick it off, let's begin with our roll call.
Trustee Wellner,
Here.
Trustee Fong,
Here.
Trustee Henderson,
Here.
Trustee Hoffman,
Here.
Trustee Moreno, present. Trustee Vela,
Here.
Trustee Vettis,
Here.
Student Trustee Geronimo, absent. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, let's go to our flag salute. And Trustee Fong, Mr. Fong, would you lead us in our flag salute, please?
Everyone, please place your right hand over your heart. Ready, begin. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States
of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God,
indivisible, with liberty
and justice for all.
Moreno.
President.
Trustee Moreno.
Okay, colleagues. Now we have the approval of the agenda. Chancellor, are there any last minute? It's a pretty simple agenda. Any changes on your side or anything that the trustees wanted to note here?
Good morning, Mr. Vettis, members of the board. No changes. The agenda is presented as noted.
Okay, thank you. If there's no objections, we'll accept the agenda and move on to public comments. Okay. Next, public comments, and I'd like to read our legal language here and open it up. I don't have any speaker cards, but I will ask for any members joining us if they.
I see you now.
Okay.
So the First Amendment and the Brown Act guarantee a member of the public
Take care. Bye-bye.
the right to criticize a public employee in the performance of his or her duties. However, speakers are encouraged to focus their comments on issues relevant to the conduct of the public's business rather than on private or unrelated matters. I want to see if, we have time limits and those kinds of things, our rules for speakers, but since I don't have any cards, Lupe and myself, I wanted to open it up to anybody that's attending here that would like to participate and offer a public comment. Okay, they can raise their hand or reach out to you. I don't see any as of now. So we will close public comment and we will begin with our presentation. Colleagues, I just want to give you a little bit of an overview and part of what we're going to be doing over the next several months. And this is ideally what we would have liked to have done last year, if not for doing a lot of activity to pivot and reposition ourselves and adapt to the challenges of COVID to us. But we had a chance to kick off our new goals setting efforts. It's complemented with a presentation and a dialogue with Dr. Manuel Pastor. And I think the goal that I've said is essentially to really give us a chance to take a look at what COVID has done, what the conditions of our communities and our service territory are facing in a common way together as we embark on our 2021-2022 goals. Our expectation is to have a mid-year review in which we'll also get a chance to take a peek into the goals, see how we're doing, see if there's a need for adjustment, and the hope there is also to supplement that with an additional guest speaker. And right now we're targeting really something closer to a deep dive on the census and what will look like in the future. So as we talk about a lot of today and a lot of the impacts today, we'll be able to pull that together with a talk about the future. And so those two things I think we hope to tie together. If there is a need for us to do additional and more, and we'll make those decisions together and we'll work together. The second part of the presentation is, and we're going to be continuing utilizing the structure and format that's been developed over the past year. And Mr. Noah Brown will continue to be our facilitator and our lead in pulling together our voices into a structured document that we can all use, evaluate, and assess for the future there. So, so with that overview, wanted to jump into the presentation here, and we're honored to be joined today by Dr. Manuel Pastor. And to let Manuel know, this group of trustees, let's see, I think, although technically I've been the longest serving trustee from 2011, the dean of our board is Mr. Moreno, who's been with the district for longer than I've been alive. But he's also served since 2013. But this is a board with many members on beginning their second term. We have one new member, and really proud to have her on this board, Trustee Michelle Henderson, who's a teacher of teachers over at Cal State LA. But the board is comprised of individuals who've worked in the community college, some of us who've worked in political environments, some of us who've taught, some of us who've engaged in issues of workforce development and community improvement, and across the board. I know you come from USC. There's a strong contingent of UCLA on this board. We won't hold that against you, but we're excited to have you here. And for colleagues, and I know some of you may have had a chance to see his full biography, but Dr. Pastor is a distinguished professor of sociology and American studies and ethnicity at USC. He's currently the director for the program of environmental and regional equity, as well as the director for the USC Center for the Study of Immigrant Integration. He's a renowned researcher, and he's got a number of published works on demographic change, economic inequality, community empowerment, environmental and social conditions facing low-income urban communities. And he holds a PhD from the University of Massachusetts Amherst, and is the inaugural holder of the Terpangian Chair in Civil Society and Social Change at USC. I know in my previous work with the then pro tem Senator De Leon, we watched him very closely on a number of boards. He was appointed to at the state level, and we were always excited to see the kinds of things where we can take his feedback and advice to be able to do some important things with government here. So with that as an introduction, I don't know if there's anything that the Chancellor you wanted to add, or colleagues you wanted to say a few words before we kick it off with Dr. Pastor. But
I do.
But okay, so Vice President and Trustee Gabriel Buelna.
Thank you. Dr. Pastor, Gabriel Buelna, a trustee. I'm also a faculty member in the Chicano Studies Department at Cal State Northridge. And I've used a few of your books in my social institutions in the Chicano community. So I'm paying attention to what you're saying, and I've seen your work evolve. So I may bring some of that up in time. I'm just kidding, by the way. you don't want to deal with that on a Saturday morning, but it's a pleasure to meet you.
Excellent. So Francisco, anything from your part, or I'd love to be able to hand it over to Dr. Pastor.
Let's go ahead and do that. But just let me personally thank friend, colleague, Dr. Pastor, for joining us this morning, accepting our invitation. He is an incredibly busy person and is engaged in significant work right now, but he carved out time this morning because he wanted to visit with our board, understands the impact of community college education to lift families and communities out of poverty into lives of prosperity, understands the immigrant experience very, very well. I think he'll do an excellent job giving us a real texture of the landscape that is Los Angeles. So Dr. Pastor, welcome. Thank you so much for accepting our invitation. Buenos dias.
So glad to, be here this morning. Let me start by saying that you're a little bit more at the end of the talk about why I love community colleges so much, why I think they represent the jewel of the California educational system and hold so much promise for our young people and the future of the state. I also want to thank everyone for being able to say the Pledge of Allegiance, which apparently turns out to be more difficult than many of us thought, with all good humor toward my great friend Kevin De Leon. And then finally, some of you have heard me speak before in person, know that I have a speech condition that's called spasmodic dysphonia, spasms around the voice box. Works pretty well when I'm mic'd. On Zoom, kind of what happens is my voice gets a little scratchy and tired out. If you think because I'm tired being with you, that's not the case. It's just this disability I'm working with. And I always like to let audiences know this is true, that this condition actually gets treated once a month with Botox, which is why I continue to look so damn good at this age. So
I was gonna say, can you refer me, please?
So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And Francisco, I'm looking at you to make sure that you're seeing a slide. Is that right? Okay. So what I want to do is I want to talk a little bit about the current moment in COVID, but I want to talk about several long-term trends in terms of demography and the economy and what they call us to do. And as leaders in Los Angeles, and in particular for the community college system, if we really have as our goal making a Los Angeles for all of us. And as we know from the current moment, LA is not for all of us. In many important ways, COVID is the disease that has revealed our illness as a society. It revealed the precarity of employment, so many people really on the edge of having a job. It revealed the racial wealth gap so that Latinos and African Americans who are on the bottom of the wealth distribution didn't have a cushion to avoid not going to work. It revealed, and we'll see this, the digital divide that's affected school children and people's ability to work. It revealed the issues of status. So those were there already. And really what COVID was a disease that kind of fell through the valleys of inequality that we already had. And the resulting disparities in terms of death and case rates is clear. So this is just-in-time research. This is data as of yesterday. And this is the age-adjusted COVID case rate. Age-adjusted means we're trying to control for the fact that older people, at least currently, are less likely to get it because they're more in shelter. They are more likely to die. You could see here that for the case rates, and we'll get to the death rates in a minute, there's a disparity between Black and white Angelenos, huge disparities between Latino and white Angelenos, and a community that people pay insufficient attention to, but ought to, is the Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander community, which has extraordinarily high COVID case rates. If you look at the age-adjusted death rates, this is the case rate, you'll see another set of disparities, but you'll notice that the disparities between white and Black Angelenos actually goes up. And the reason for that has a lot to do with the relationship of comorbidities in the Black community, of obesity, diabetes, and hypertension. But the important thing to realize is that those diseases themselves, those pre-existing conditions, are in fact the result of structural racism. The lack of parks in Black communities, the lack of decent food, and simply the stress of being Black in America all contribute to those comorbidities. And you could see for the Latino community, even higher death rates again for the Pacific Islander. For the Latino community, we see the comorbidities that we were talking about, but we also see, and we'll see this in a few minutes, extremely overcrowded housing in multi-generational settings. That impacts Pacific Islanders as well. And you'll see the concentration in essential employment. What does this look like statewide? There's a kind of interesting pattern here.
Dr. Pastor?
Yes.
President Vettis, I apologize. Should we write down our questions afterward, or can we ask in the meantime? What's the protocol for today?
Dr. Pastor, how would you take it through a chat? Is that easiest for you, or do you want us to pause and ask a question? I mean, we have a question and answer session at the end too for overall, but I know there may be some
I love
clarification.
questions and answers. If they're really deep and consequential versus being clarification and,
Okay.
what am I saying? Maybe if it's more philosophical or something, we'll put it off to the end. But Trustee Bodna, did you have a question?
Yeah, could you go back to the other slide? Okay, here with regard to the Asian community and the Pacific Islander community, in LA, because we haven't gone over what the Asian population breakdown is.
Yeah.
So in LA, do we have a larger Filipino community, so it's naturally high, naturally high? So I'm just not understanding how to interpret it based on the numbers. The other question, the same one on Latinos, because in LA it's mostly Mexican and Central American. Do you have disproportionate within the numbers, but the Asian and Pacific Islander threw me off more?
Yeah, well, first, the data that's collected by the state on the Latinos is just Latino. So we'll look a little bit at those kind of decompositions that you're talking about when we look at more long-term issues, but the current health data is just basically Hispanic or Latino. On the Asian and Pacific Islander, what was happening before was that people were looking at the AAPI, how people put that together as one single category. And as a result, what they were missing was what was going on with the Pacific Islander population, which is not, the Filipinos are considered to be Asians. The Pacific Islanders are Guamanians, Samoans, Native Hawaiians, which we have a pretty substantial population in Southern California, and they've been extraordinarily hard hit by this COVID disease.
Thank you.
If you look at the shifting share of cumulative cases in California, you'll notice something pretty interesting. At the beginning of the pandemic, most of the people who got hit the hardest, earliest were whiter and wealthier communities who were either engaged in more international travel themselves or were more engaged with international travelers and therefore more likely to get COVID through those means. But you can see as we went from mid-April on, when they first started collecting these statistics, you could see how the share of cases that were Latino went up dramatically over time. That is, that this disease really moved from the west side to the South LA and the east side over time and dramatically impacted Latino communities and other communities of color. Why are these vulnerabilities present? There's a couple of different reasons that are critical to understand. One is who's working in what are considered essential and higher risk jobs. Let me define those. Now, what's interesting is that I know that those of us who are professors think we're essential. Apparently we're not. What's really, and certainly someone who's a hedge fund manager thinks that they're incredibly important. Instead, they look like someone who would lose a lot of money on GameStop. So we know who's really essential now are agricultural workers, meat packers, people who work in logistics like truck drivers, et cetera, our grocery store clerks, and of course our health workers. There's essential work, and then it's, by COVID terms, higher risk work, meaning work in which you're in close proximity to other people. Most of the professions I just talked about are those kind of professions. There's also higher risk non-essential. Higher risk non-essential means retail, restaurants, hospitality. You're in high proximity with other people, but it's not essential work. One of the things you're going to notice about this is Black Angelenos, Latinos, being US born or immigrant, and in particular Asian American immigrants and Pacific Islander immigrants are highly over-indexed in essential higher risk work, meaning that they were more likely to be going to work and running the risk of contracting the disease. And if you look at the white population, much more likely to be in non-essential, lower risk work, exactly the kind of work that could go into remote work from your computer. I want you to notice something else about this because it'll help you understand an interesting contradiction. That Black Latino, and certain parts of the AAPI community are also over concentrated in the non-essential higher risk that is retail, restaurants, and hospitality. That's why it's been possible for Black and Latino communities to both be harder hit by the disease and harder hit by the disemployment impacts of the disease. Harder hit by the disease because they're more likely to be working if they're working in essential work, more likely to be hit by the economic impacts because they are more likely to be working in restaurants and retail, et cetera. And in fact, one of the things for you to realize about the current moment in our economy is the following. When we generally think of a recession, like the 2008, 2009 recession, which is the one that's probably the most seared in our recent memory, we often call those a macro event. They affect everyone. So for example, in 2008, 2009, it's clear rich people didn't get hit as hard as low income people, but real estate brokers lost their jobs, people working in the finance industry lost their jobs, as well as construction workers, manufacturing workers, et cetera. Hit a lot of people. This recession is different. The stock market is at all-time highs. Property values are continuing to increase, particularly in higher value areas. People who are professional middle class continue to be able to work and get their incomes. This is one of the reasons why California, quote unquote, has a quote unquote unexpected budget surplus, because rich people didn't see their incomes go down. In fact, those relying on the stock market saw their incomes go up. Who's been nailed in this recession are lower income communities, communities of color, exactly the kind of communities that you serve. Another dimension of this particular crisis had to do with the digital divide. This is part of a graph that we put together for our study called No Going Back, Together for an Equitable and Inclusive Los Angeles. And here what we did was we asked the question, definitely relevant to the community college system, for kids who were in K-12 in March, when they were asked to go home, how many of them were on the wrong side of the digital divide? And being on the wrong side of the digital divide in the literature is considered if you lack high-speed internet in your house and you lack a computer or a notebook, because it's hard to do all of your homework on a phone. And certainly it's hard if you don't have high-speed internet. When the county shut down schools, 13% of white kids went home to being on the wrong side of the digital divide. But 35% of Black kids, 39% of Latino kids, 36% of Pacific Islander kids, 36% of Native American kids. And so this is a really stark digital divide, and it created, my wife is the superintendent of the Lawndale Elementary School District. Probably many of you know it. It's, very working class, predominantly Latino and Black. But they did everything they could to get hotspots out and Chromebooks and all that kind of stuff. But still, these are the kind of conditions folks faced. And we are going to see probably a year of lost learning, which is going to ripple its way in several years into the community college and the sort of work that I know that you're trying to get beyond, which is remediating what the public schools have not been able to do. But in this case, even the work we put into the public schools is going to be a challenge. And not only did those kids go home to being on the wrong side of the digital divide, they went home to living in very overcrowded housing units. So this shows you how many were likely to go into, these is really extremely overcrowded housing units, meaning more than 1.5 persons per room. That doesn't mean more than 1.5 persons per bedroom. It means 1.5 persons per room, including the kitchen and the living room, et cetera. And you can see here, very few white kids were in overcrowded conditions. We've got lots of overcrowded households in the Latino community, twice the overcrowding, 2.5 times the overcrowding in Black households as in white households. And that's also what makes for the COVID disease to be more easy to be communicated. But it's not as though that this was something that just occurred on the contours of a already equal landscape. And that's been one of the things that's been important to lift up, because in some ways, COVID is something that can affect all of us, but because of the pre-existing inequality, it affects each of us and each of our communities differently. For example, the homeless rate for Black folks in Los Angeles County is more than 4 times what it is for the overall population. So the kind of risks that are there are incredibly important. So what is the broader context that COVID kind of fit into? What are the broader demographic trends? And here, what I want to point to is the big pictures, that big picture and big picture trends that are affecting LA County. And I want to point out a kind of central thing that I think is going to go through what I'm about to say, which is that a lot of what we think is true is not quite true. And we need to shake our brains a little bit in order to understand what's going on. You'll see this in just a minute. So a lot of people pay attention to the changing demographics of the United States. You can see this shows you what's happening to the US moving between 1980 and 2050. And of course, the big news that has created political turmoil in the country is that by the year 2043, 2044, the US will become majority people of color. That fills some of us with great delight. We're excited that the world of Korean taco trucks will be shared with the rest of the United States. It fills others in the United States, and we know, with the kind of dread that's fueled the racism and xenophobia that gave rise to Donald Trump as a political phenomena and the attack on democracy that occurred on January 6th. What's interesting about that demographic trend between 2000 and 2050, if you look at it going from about being 69% white in the United States in 2000 to 47% white in 2050, is that's basically the demographic trend that California went through between 1980 and 2000. California is America just sooner. And if you look at that demographic change going on between, say, the 80s and the 90s, you'll note that in the mid 1990s was the rise of Proposition 187, the rise of 3 strikes laws, the elimination of bilingual education, the elimination of affirmative action, the kind of racist freakout about demographic trends that we are seeing happen in the United States right now. So we were an unfortunate harbinger of that future. But one of the things that I think is important to realize is the slowing of demographic change that's going on in California. A lot of people, when they look at the United States becoming majority people of color by 2043, 2044, they think that what's going to happen is that it's not the rest of the United States that's going to change. It's that simply that California will become, 150% Latino, that there'll be sort of super Latinos marching the earth, declaring that they are back. But what's going on is demographic change is shifting in California. It's slowing down. And if you look at Los Angeles in particular, we became majority people of color in about 1988. And our demographic change is very much slowing down. If you want to know the California or the Los Angeles of tomorrow, look at the Los Angeles of today. It's a very interesting thing. So why is that? Well, there are a couple of reasons why, and there's a couple of legacies about it that are really important. The first is to understand that in the 1970s and in the 1980s, one quarter of all of the immigrants coming into the United States in the 70s and the 80s came in through Los Angeles County and settled in Los Angeles County. So we had a gigantic run up in the share of our population that was foreign born. But if you look at this graph right now, while the share of foreign born is going up in the United States, and while it's peaking, flattening, and slightly declining in California, the share of the foreign born has actually been on the decline in Los Angeles County since the year 2000. Our Latino population and Asian population is now much more likely to be US born. If they are immigrant, they are much more likely to be long settled in the country. This shows you California. This is for all states, and we're ranking the states by the share of the population that's been in the United States since 2004. You can see that California has the most settled immigrant population, deeply rooted. You'll see why this makes a difference in a minute. And you'll see that this is particularly the case with our undocumented residents. So this compares the recency of arrival for lawful permanent residents, people who have a green card, with undocumented immigrants in the county of LA. And I want you to look at something that might be a little bit surprising to you, but it's not if you think about it. The share of undocumented immigrants who've been in the United States for more than a decade is actually higher than it is for the share of LPRs. Makes sense, actually. If you've been following the trends, the undocumented population in the United States peaked in 2007, fell sharply during that recession, 2007, 2009, and then it's continued to decline ever since. And it's continued to decline ever since because there's less push factors from Mexico. There's still certainly people coming from Central America, given the crisis there, but the push factors from Mexico changed dramatically. Their economy is doing much better than it used to in the past, and the fertility rate in Mexico has gone way down. So there's less young folks who are getting ready to migrate. As a result, it's much more likely if you're undocumented in LA, you've been here for a very long time. And in fact, one thing I would really encourage you to do, and I was doing this in a mistaken way on purpose, is to stop talking about undocumented immigrants and start talking about undocumented Angelenos, undocumented Californians, and undocumented Americans. They are long settled. They are part of who we are. And you can see this by looking at the following statistic. By the way, can you tell that I like statistics? So this is the number of undocumented immigrants in LA County, the number of US citizen family members who live with them. So not just it's your tia or tio in another house. This is someone, you're US born, US citizen, or naturalized, you live with an undocumented family member, or you have a green card and you live with an undocumented family member. 18% of Angelenos are either undocumented themselves or living with a family member who is. That's why it was such criminal public policy when the first CARES Act excluded aid to the undocumented and even to families where one of the two people who filed a tax return was undocumented, because it impacted not just those folks, which probably wasn't fair, but impacted entire families and communities. Another big trend that's important to you is the change in the youth population. And one of the things to note here is that the youth population overall is on the decline. And something that people don't often think about is that that's not something confined to, say, the non-Hispanic white population. If you look at the line at the top, the brown line, it's the number of Latinos who are below the age of 18, which has been on the decline in Los Angeles County for a bit more than a decade. In fact, here's a little demographic data point that you can use at a cocktail party if we're ever allowed to have cocktail parties again. You could use it at a Zoom cocktail party too, but it's not quite as entertaining, because I like it when you say a demographic fact and people are so excited, they bring you a drink with a little umbrella. That's, a demographer's joy. But what's very interesting is of the top 100 metropolitan areas in the United States, the only metro area in the United States that over the last decade saw a decline in the number of Hispanic or Latino children is Los Angeles. Because, again, our Latino population is now much more likely to be US born, or if they're immigrant, they're much more likely to be long settled, and their family formation patterns are getting like that of the US average, which is barely reproducing ourselves in terms of 2 children. So this does spell certain kind of issues for what's the future population of community colleges as well. Now, against that background, and I'm going to jump through the rest of these slides fairly quickly to make sure we have time for Q&A. It's really important to realize a couple of things. One is that this takes people's wages in the US and California, and it kind of looks at if you're at the 90th percentile, meaning 90% make more, 10% make more, 90% make less. At the 80th percentile, 20% make more, 80% make less, and so on. It looks at the wage shifts between 1980 and the most recent period. And what you can see, of course, is a widening divide between the top and the bottom of the labor market. But you can see that that dramatic increase for those at the top has been sharper in California than it was in the rest of the United States, that the decline in the bottom was bigger in California than it was in the rest of the United States. In California and in Los Angeles, we basically have inequality on steroids. The other thing is to take a look at part of what explains it. And part of what explains it is something you're familiar with, education. And I'm going to go through these quickly, but this one is important to you for a reason I think you should use as a big selling point. This looks at 1978 versus 2016 for California. And what we're asking is, what's the average wage for someone with less than a high school degree, high school only, AA degree, BA degree, post-grad degree? What you'll see is that in 1978, there was a $16 gap in today's dollars between someone with less than a high school degree and someone with a postgraduate degree. That gap has grown to $31. Those with less than a high school degree or a high school degree, their wages have actually fallen. Those with a BA or better, their wages have actually risen. By the way, which degree retained its value? The AA degree. So really crucial for the middle of the labor market. However, this wage story in terms of education is not enough. We need to understand a couple of other things about this, and then I'm going to jump over a bunch of slides and get to the end. First, we need to understand that it's not just if we got people a lot of education, they would do better. And here's the reason why. This is looking at the United States and California. Basically over the same period of time as that education thing. In California, the productivity of the average worker in that period went up nearly 100%. The wages of those workers went up about 5%. That money went somewhere. It went to corporate coffers. Workers became much more productive, but they didn't have the bargaining power at any level to capture what they were producing. There's a sharp racial divide, something we're quite familiar with. And then one thing I just want to point out, which I think is really crucial, then I'll jump over to my last slide. I'm a big believer in education. And we know that education matters. But I want you to look at this chart. I know one thing you're going to say to me is, Manuel, this is from 1990. Why are you showing me 1990? You'll see why in a minute. You can see here something that we, this is breaking down wages, median wages by education level and race. And you'll see here something that your parents probably told you and we tell everyone else, which is that as you get more education, what happens? Your wages go up. But you'll see that at each and every level of education, at least in 1990, white folks made more than people of color, than Black folks, Latino, Asian, or Pacific Islander. Now, what we would hope is that as time goes on, that those racial differences for the same level of education would do what? Shrink. Because we like to think we've become a less racist society. I'm about to show you the median wages by education level in the current period. You're going to notice two things about them. The first is something we knew before, which is that less than high school, they dropped. As you go up the education level, they went up. But the racial gaps went up even more. So education matters, but there's still quite persistent discrimination in labor markets. By the way, it's more significant for Black workers than for Latino workers. I can get into some of the reasons why in Q&A, but it means that and part of it is just discrimination. Part of it is network effects, because since Black and Latino workers may be concentrated in those parts of the labor market with not as much rewards, they don't know how to connect people to those things. So we are going to need to do stuff about this. I'm going to jump over these slides to get to what do I think we need to do and to tell a story. So I think that both what COVID revealed and what this underlying data in terms of demographic change and inequalities compels is a new and different approach. Yes, I think we need to stress the role of education, but we also need to understand that that will not be enough to challenge racial inequities, that we need to tackle those both in terms of delivering the education and being vigilant about what's happening in labor markets, what's happening in safety systems or policing, and to acknowledge the key role of challenging anti-Black racism. Two, we need to understand something I didn't have much time to lift up here, but is important, which is that the research is showing us that when you center equity, nearly everyone gains. When we address the educational divide, we get a more productive labor force and the regional economy grows. When we shrink income disparities, there's more ability for people to come together on a growth pattern and workforce development, and the overall economy grows. When we make sure that people make more money, there's more demand in the economy, and there's an ability for everyone to get ahead. So we often, those of us who are concerned with equity, bring it in as a fairness argument. We need to bring it in also as an economic argument, as a way to supercharge, to turbocharge, to drive forward an economy of the future. In doing that, we need to be honest that a lot of the inequalities we face, they're often viewed as a bug, like something that went wrong. But often they're a feature of the systems that have been set up. And we need to think about that. And in doing that, we need to make sure that equity is baked in, not sprinkled on. That it's not something that we say, well, we've got to do workforce development, then we're going to figure out how it's fair. That we've got to grow the economy, then we'll figure out how we can get something to poor people. That we need to start at the beginning with an equity mindset and with equity principles. So let me just close with this story, which is partly about, Francisco, your district. I often close bigger talks, I guess now even Zoom talks, by talking about my story and reminding folks that my dad came to the United States in the 1930s with papers that were imperfect. He was one of those undocumented folks in the earlier graphs. When World War II came, he was given a choice between joining the US Army and going to Europe or being deported. And he couldn't figure out what to do. So he gave a penny to my cousin Carlitos, who flipped it. And that made the decision. My dad went to the war, got a path to citizenship as a result. And when he came back to the US, he was the recipient of the GI Bill. And that meant something really important, which was that he, a guy with a sixth grade education, could go to LA Trade Tech. And at LA Trade Tech, learn about electricity and move from being a janitor to being an air conditioner repair man for industrial air conditioners. And our family could move from being poor to being working class. And with the GI Bill, he was able to buy a home in La Puente and get that little asset, that wealth that's so often denied to Black and Latino families. And I went to public schools there because at that time we were investing in them in the ways that we should be investing in them now. And when time came for me to go to college, there was affirmative action to take a chance on a kid like me that did not fit the typical profile of who was going to college at that time. I came from a house, probably like many of you, with only 2 books in it. I said my dad dropped out in 6th grade, my mom dropped out in 10th to go to work. And what I think is crucial about that story is that people often look at someone like me, who is now a full professor with an endowed chair at USC. And regardless of how small an accomplishment those of you from UCLA think that is, it's significant. But people look at that and they think about that as an individual story. And I would not deny the fact that my parents worked hard, that I've worked hard to try to get to where I am. But I think, Trustee Buelna, with the kind of courses you teach, you would acknowledge that that's really a story about public policy that makes it possible for people to succeed. Platforms like education systems and labor unions, et cetera. And it's about social movements that brought us affirmative action, the civil rights movement, that brought us investments in education, teachers' movements, that brought us a decent wage, the labor movement. And that what we need to do, as much as we encourage our students to work hard and do what they can against the conditions that they face, is that we've got to work with others to change those structural conditions, to create the platforms for success that rely on public policy, and that we're only going to get there through the vibrant social movements that I think many of us work with, that I know Trustee Buelna both works with and teaches about. So that's what I wanted to leave you with this morning. Talk a lot about that in this book, State of Resistance, which would be a dandy buy for everyone who's a trustee.
All right, thank you, Dr. Pastor. Colleagues, on our schedule, just to give you a sense, we're set to be here with with Manuela at 10:15. So we'll do some questions here. After that, we'll take a quick break and then we'll come back at 10:20 for our discussion of the 2021 goals with Noah. Let me do this first. I want to give everybody a chance on the Board of Trustees to ask a question. And then for those individuals that are attending or around, if possible, use the chat section. I'll do my best to sort of open it up and allow, there's lots of good stuff here. And we have in our attendee section, Dr. Pastor, we have our college presidents, and then we have a smattering of vice chancellors, college presidents, and some of the leadership of the interest groups here at LACCD, including our president of our faculty guild. And so want to make sure that that if they'd like, they can do that. But let me kick that off with the board. And I'll say this, Dr. Pastor, there's a couple of us here whose parents also had their career path go through LA Trade Tech, me being one of those, with both my parents doing it. So nursing and in the machine shop. And so both career technical space. But they also started off as immigrants to go from home care working in garment industry and into a hospital setting was a big deal in our household. So, and that happened through Trade Tech here. But let me do this. I got a couple of hands first. I'll go through them first, and then we'll get through all the trustees. So prepare your questions and be mindful of time. We've got about 20 minutes to do this. And thank you for all your patience, and thank you for that presentation. So let me kick it off with Trustee Vela, and then we'll go to Trustee Buona.
Thank you. And thank you so much, Dr. Pastor. It was an amazing presentation. I really got to tell you, I've been in education in so many different matters. I was an elected K-12 board member for 8 years in Montebello, California, a very middle-class neighborhood. And, one of the things, and it's more of a comment, and I would love for us to really kind of, think about this as we move on with the upcoming years, in a post-pandemic world. I belong to a group of, I went to Pepperdine, which is traditionally a very wealthy Republican institution. And, I have several friends I did my master's program with, and we meet each month similar to this. And we talk about, what stock is doing well in Wall Street. And I was actually, I didn't want to join it for years, until I turned 40 years old. And I'm like, wow, what am I going to do in my future? And, it's really been extremely helpful for me. Where I believe we really need to understand is that people think demography is a good thing, more Latinos, more African Americans, Asian Pacific Islanders. But what we're seeing to your data is showing that, but the wage disparity is getting even bigger. And you're looking at, a South Africa model, where, the wealthy are the political elite. But also what's worrying me is white liberals in particular dictating the narrative for African American and Latino communities and students, and they're manipulating them. It's becoming more evident. I mean, I've seen it with my own eyes in my last election that I ran. You can't be Latino, a true Latino, and be wealthy. That's off the table because you're a sellout. And it's not coming from the Latino community. It's coming from the white liberal establishment who's holding me accountable because I'm, I own a successful PR firm. I must be corrupt because I'm not white. So wealth building, and, I've had these conversations with Antonio Hernandez and several other people who are big on wealth building. I was very happy to see legislation putting together opportunities for minorities, African American and Latino serving in corporate boards, which needed to be done a very long time ago, and we had to legislate that. But that's a problem, and it's getting bigger, and I think it's going to really create a barrier for our students, current students, to feel as if those types of wealth building careers are true to themselves, are something that you know, could be potentially a good thing in their family. And I want to bring this up, you know, and Chancellor Rodriguez has been excellent at this, but, you know, I've tried to bring cannabis curriculum to LACCD. Well, why? Well, I saw firsthand that the cannabis industry, which is fledgling, which is not even legal in the United States, only in California, is a very big money maker. I don't smoke cannabis. I don't really like it, but I'm fine with it if people want to do it. It's legal in the state. But you're looking at disparity yet again. Corporate America and white America making billions of dollars in the cannabis industry currently in California, but our people are smoking it. Our people are using it. And yet again, because we do not provide opportunities for our students to be able to learn to cultivate, run a business, pull a license. I've represented people to help them with licenses and so on and so forth. And, you know, the money that is there for wealth building. Another similar is construction. You know, construction, we do it here, $9 billion in construction worth. You look at the numbers and you're seeing that the majority of people that are making money, and you see it, you know, Jacobs Construction, one of our people, they made their highest number in Wall Street recently, where their shares spiked up. As you said, Wall Street's doing well. We're not at the table. And so, and by the way, you're talking to Hermandad Mexicana Nacional, I started Honor Pack, LGBT. I mean, I'm everything you want to talk about, you know, liberal movements and progressive ideals, but our students are not talking wealth building. And I think a lot of this is the fault of our own, you know, very progressive left to left, you know, Bernie Sanders, which, you know, nothing against Bernie, but this is happening. And I feel sad. I feel sad that our people, yet again, Black, brown, and not so much Asian American. I think Asian Americans, as you saw in the wage gap. And I want to say, you know, $25 for AA, and then in 1978 to 2016, it might have held, but that is pretty sad that is still acceptable. And my partner, who's an X-ray technician, is making that $26 an hour, and he went to Fullerton College, AA degree. So I can't believe that he could have been making this in 1978. So I'm actually right now really worked up, but I'm happy we're talking about it. I wish that as trustees, we look to the future to provide wealth building careers and trust. I mean, Chancellor Rodriguez, you've been amazing at this. You have been very thoughtful about this, but we need to have it for, for us to think about it in the future. So just want to leave it at that. I know we're going to probably get a progressive side of this, of my story, but I'm really a believer that we need to start building equity. Thank you.
But one comment, really, well, two comments really quickly. First, I often I feel enriched when I hear people say, I see myself in your data. This may be the first time someone said, I saw my partner's wage in your data. So that's beautiful. And I do want to say that we need to be able to do something that Americans are not very good at, hold two ideas in our head at the same time. And it is that we need to think about wealth and assets as a form of security for people to build and empower the community. And then also, what's our mutual obligation to each other as we become more successful to create the pathways for others. So that's the way I would pick up on what you just said, Trustee Vela.
Thank you. Trustee
I
Buona.
appreciate that response. That's very well thought of. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Thank you. Dr. Pastor, I grew up in LA. I grew up in South LA, and I'm Mexican. And, one of the things that, growing up in LA, if you're Mexican, you know that, you're clearly told you have a place in LA, which is generally not in leadership. But what's interesting, I was born in 1972, and during that time period, when I say Mexican, LA is generally made of Mexican and Central American populations. You add those two together, you probably hit around 85, 90%. We were, as Latinos, but mostly Mexican, a minority. Right now, Latinos are 61% of LACCD, and if you add Latino, African American, Asian, you probably hit around 80%. So you're no longer dealing, going to a point that Trustee Vela mentioned, that we're kind of, I think he mentioned apartheid in the statement earlier, is how we deal with populations that are not minorities, but are majorities. And because when the system was set up, it was set up for folks who now are the minority, who are white. And that's different. And really, and so as we're looking at the analysis, I mean, let me just say, I admire you. And that's why I'm gonna, push you a little on, on this. We have in your, and I'm gonna, add to this, because look, I have a PhD in political science and I'm an attorney. Plenty of times in academia, I've been literally told we only hire one Mexican per department. We can't have more than that, because if you have 2 Mexicans in a department, you have a revolution. LA is significantly anti-Mexican, anti-Central American. I mean, so when you look at your data and the fact that the data isn't disaggregated, not your fault, but that tells me that those who are accumulating data don't either care or focus on this population, the fact that we're not disaggregating it. You have significant differences between Mexican, Mexican American, Central American, within Caribbean, within different groups. And the fact that that's not disaggregated, and it's not your fault, let me just say, that's why I said, but what I'm not getting from especially Latino academicians is that analysis that will then translate into actionable items for folks like LACCD in order to truly represent those numbers. And I'd recommend, Juan Gomez Quinones out of UCLA, wrote a lot on anti-Mexicanness in LA specifically, but in the Southwest, and to add that discussion on anti-ness, because LA, we are clearly, if you're Mexican, if you're Central American, all those lines of where you could not live, where you could not do, we're focused on significant on us and the tragedies of the 19th century. So as much as we're focusing on the immigrant population and it's growing less, that Mexican American Chicano population, that baked in anti-Mexicanness, hopefully will be added to that dialogue as well. Thank you.
So there's so much in what you said. And the other thinker I think is very important in this regard is Tomás Almaguer in his book, Racial Fault Lines, which talks about how the brown-white divide being so definitive in California. Couple of things. Well, first a question. Where in South LA did you grow up?
42nd and Arlington.
Perfect. And the reason why I mention this is
Transfiguration Elementary School.
The reason I think I mention this, and this gets to the disaggregation, we are publishing, New York University Press is publishing a book that I co-wrote called South Central Dreams, Finding Home and Building Community in South LA, which is about the demographic change in South Los Angeles, which was about 80% African American in 1970, is now about 2/3 Latino, and about the way in which that initial change had elements of Black-Brown conflict. Now it's got a lot of elements of Black-Brown community building, but there's a big disaggregation there about Mexicans, immigrants, Central Americans, because there was a big Central American presence, particularly down the Vermont corridor, and also a lot of distinctions between generations. That is, between the older generation, probably your parents when they moved in, and folks like you who grew up there in terms of their politics and attitudes, et cetera. But I want to refer you to 2 other tools. And if you want to invite me back, we can talk exactly about those disaggregations, because this was a short presentation, probably longer than many of you even wanted. But I want to refer you to 2 tools. One is something called the National Equity Atlas. It is something that we have put together with policy linked. And the National Equity Atlas for all 50 states, the top 150 metropolitan areas, and the largest 100 cities in the United States provides disaggregated data that includes breaking Latinos out by countries of origin, immigrant, non-immigrant, does the same thing for Asian Americans, because as many of you know, that single category covers both Chinese engineers and Laotian families in poverty in Long Beach, and disaggregates by education, everything you could disaggregate by, because we're a complete believer in what you just said, which is that in order to really get at equity, you need to measure it, and that means you need to disaggregate. And what we wanted to do was to remove the excuse of anyone in a city or a county to say, well, we're not tracking those populations, we don't have the data. Because while it didn't pop up in this presentation, much of this can be disaggregated, and it's incredibly important. The second thing that I would refer you to is something that we just did, which is called the California Immigrant Data Portal. And the California Immigrant Data Portal, specifically for California, looks at immigrant populations with a very high level of disaggregation. Lifting up, for example, the Black immigrant population, which people don't often realize is there, but is incredibly important. While Black immigrants are a small share of, say, LA's or California immigrants, we forget that about 16 to 18% of Black Angelenos are either immigrant themselves or the son or daughter of immigrants. And so immigration is an important experience for them too. So California Immigrant Data Portal, high levels of disaggregation, and all the kind of stuff that you're talking about, Trustee, is really important to get at the nuances of the experiences. And of course, the bigger picture of the strength of anti-Mexican racism in California.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the detail.
Thank you. So trustees, I want to be mindful of time. So instead of going through everybody, I'm just going to ask for people to raise their hand. I have Trustee Fong, and if none of the other trustees want to ask a question, I do have a question, and we'll get close to wrapping here this dialogue. So Trustee Fong, Trustee Henderson, Hoffman, and Moreno, if you'd like to ask a question, if you can do your virtual hand up here. So, okay, good. I see Trustee Henderson next. So we'll do Fong, Henderson, and then I'll conclude, and Hoffman and Moreno, if you are inclined to, let me know. Okay, Trustee Fong.
Thank you so much, Mr. President, and good morning, Dr. Pastor, and good morning, everyone. Hope everyone's doing well. And thank you, Dr. Pastor, for a really robust presentation. And I love USC. You guys gave me my first job when I was in high school at 15 years of age. And my parents met at LACCD College, both immigrants and really coming. And they met there. I wouldn't be here today. They hadn't obviously met there. And Malcolm went to Poly High School, which was the precursor to Trade Tech. So thank you for all the connects with our district here. And it was great working with you with Secretary Solis back in 2014 when she was coming in office, and we were talking about workforce training programs. And I really enjoyed our meetings then. And so good to see you here today. When we look at wage disparities and we look at our workforce training programs and short-term training programs here at our district, the board, the chancellor, our administration, we've been very, and the presidents and all the staff and faculty, we've been very keenly focused on how we can continue to build out our job training programs and our career technical education programs, especially as we come out of this COVID-induced recession. And when we look at high growth sectors and job training, and whether it's biotech, hospitality, construction, green jobs, solar, weatherization, information technology, all these different fields, I think there's an opportunity for us as a district, as an organization, to help close some of these wage gaps that were discussed in the presentation. But how do we continue to make these opportunities available to our residents, to our Latino community, our African American community, our Pacific Islander communities, and to all communities? And really, when we look at something even this, like the entertainment trades, we have a program at West LA College that's in partnership with Cinema Production Resources, and it brings more people of color into the entertainment industry. And that was a really good paying jobs. So we'd love to continue the conversation partnering with you and how we can build out these job training programs. As you know, the chancellor is the chair of our LA Orange County Regional Consortium. And we've also been advocating at the state level to really look at strong workforce dollars and equity lens from that standpoint as to how we can change the formula there to address the high unemployment here in Los Angeles, especially in our Latino and African American communities. So I look forward to seeing and just putting this out there as we continue to embrace the hopes and aspirations of our students, as folks come back to our campuses to get better job training and certificates to get a better paying job. How can we partner with you on these issues as we continue to build out these programs? You've been a foremost expert on workforce development for so many years as well. So thank you for everything you're doing for us, and I look forward to continuing our partnership together, Dr. Pastor. Thank you.
Thanks. I look forward to working together more. The one thing I would add that I think might be useful is that the world is going to look a lot different. And a lot of our past projections forward, they're just not going to work. So I think one thing that'd be really good for the board to do, if I might suggest it, is to try to blue sky what the big trends are. Because I do think we're going to get more remote work going. I think public health is going to become a bigger sector of the economy, along with biotech, et cetera. I think there's just simply going to be there's going to be a lot more investment, particularly given this administration and the commitment now of a lot of corporate folks in going green, going EV, et cetera. And so I just think we want to make sure we're not straight lining the past so that we are training people for the jobs of the future. And even our predictions from 6 months ago, well, not 6 months, but our predictions from 18 months ago probably don't match linearly where we are and are going to be.
Thank you. Trustee
Thank you so
Henderson.
much.
Trustee Henderson,
You're muted.
mute.
Sorry. Thank you, Trustee Veras. Thank you so much, Dr. Pastor, for your for this presentation. It got my wheels spinning. You know, and thank you for mentioning and referring to the intersectionality of Blacks, you know, in this country and especially in California. You know, what I'm noticing, you know, I was a little girl when at the early days of the graph that you showed. My dad is a graduate of Trade Tech College when community college was free. And, you know, I can truly say that I am a beneficiary of that opportunity. But it was also a time where Blacks, who were in the majority, as you noticed, in terms of population or growing majority, were not encouraged to attend college and not push towards higher ed pursuits. And my dad also went on to Cal State LA, where I'm a graduate of, also second generation now, to obtain a bachelor's degree. And so I think for the community colleges, when we have to think, we need to consider the intersectionality, as Trustee Buolna mentioned, of all of our students, because we have a number of students in the community colleges, especially in LACCD, that identify as Black and Latino, or specifically Black and Mexican. And when we don't consider the intersectionality of our students, we deprive them of the support that they need and also of opportunities. And also, you know, when you noted that the immigration is slowing in some of our demographics, especially over the past decade, they're increasing in terms of our Black immigrants, you know, because there was a time that certain Black immigrants, say from Haiti and other Caribbean countries, were not allowed to come in and therefore not encouraged. And so, you know, how would you recommend or push us toward focusing more on the intersectionality of our students and of our employees in this district in terms of viewing from a racial justice and equity lens?
Well, so really good set of points. Makes me think about one of the folks who contributed to our book on South LA is a young man named Walter Thompson Hernandez, who is actually, he would call himself Blaxican, Black and Mexican. And he wrote a wonderful book, which I will recommend, called The Compton Cowboys, which is about the cowboys in Compton. It's just a marvelous book. So I think that a couple of things are important. One is to talk more about those phenomena, and so in terms of both data and stories, so that students see themselves. Because we live in a world, I mean, historically, the United States has been very black-white, an apartheid-like system with regard to color. Even Latinos became very difficult to understand in that context, right? And I think the fact that people come from, and increasingly, if you start looking at this younger generation, they do have folks, one parent's Black, one parent's Asian or Latino or whatever, or white, and that they are able, I talked about young people being able to do 2 ideas in their head at the same time. They are able to understand the multiplicity of their experiences, but they're also able to understand that if you're just a little Black, the way you're going to be treated by the police is very different. They're able to have friend circles that are very diverse, but they know that certain people are going to be targeted by ICE versus others. And so I think we need to build on that understanding that they've got and offer more curriculum on that kind of issue, and then also build it into staff training. I'm sure that you do staff anti-bias training, and I think thinking about what the next, there's anti-bias and then there's anti-racist. Anti-bias is so to make sure that you don't discriminate based on race or sexual identity or gender or ableism, which we haven't talked about today at all, right? But there's a difference between that and an equity approach, which says, how do we take it to the next level and create really welcoming environments that allow people's full selves to be there and for them to blossom? So I don't know what kind of training. I know we are at USC really recommending strongly that we move from anti-bias training to anti-racist training, because it's not enough to not have your biases show. It's how do you actually actively create a welcoming environment for people's full selves to blossom and contribute. And again, LA Trade Tech, awesome.
Fantastic. So let me ask one question, and then I see Dr. Perez, and we'll end the questions with him, and he gets that little special nod since it's his retirement year, and he's the dean of our presidents of all our community colleges here in this district. So, Dr. Perez, my question, I'm a huge believer in I think you've touched on this a couple of times about sort of the jobs of the future. For me, it's about how to create career paths that are resilient, right? That are strong, hardened, and I take that more as the career of the future of how a job can, stay fresh. I use the experience in my own household with my father being a machine shop guy, where what they manufactured left and closed, and you have to do something else, right? And compile the skills versus my mother's work in healthcare continued forward and continued to, and she was a nurse during the time of the AIDS epidemic, where it opened spaces for her that others didn't want to go to. And as an immigrant Latina woman, sometimes you raise your hand because, it's the job, it's a much better job than the job she came from, and created a wonderful pathway there. But jobs of the future and sort of that resilient work, I also have to make the observation that in the essential and non-essential, that in itself is interesting because the non-essential tends to pay more than what we categorize as the essential. So sometimes it's the way we evaluate the value of work, to understand in our economy that you'd like to see what's considered essential to be good paying, important jobs. But I think COVID certainly revealed that non-essential, that kind of, you know, sitting on your butt in front of a computer is sometimes better paid than physically being out there in work that poses you to risk and danger. And so as we're sort of trying to understand that we do have a lot of job training we do, principally job training that we've done has been for the essential workforce. And oftentimes our students make a living, like travel and hospitality industries are a huge part of what our working adults that come to Trade Tech and come to the other campuses we have to improve themselves. It's where they were at. And what they're trying to do is elevate. But the interesting thing is they end up, you know, the pathway that we've set it and aspire to, it's probably what we consider non-essential, but higher paying. So it's an interesting, you know, sort of thing that rattles in my head. And as we create this resilient workforce, and we really are targeting what's essential and what's important to our economy, but just to understand that sometimes those pathways may not pay as much, and they may be network systems or maybe anything else. But you know, a general comment, and then you know, just curious to see what you think about that sort of like dichotomy issue, and then with that, I'll reach over to Dr. Bettis here for a last question or comment.
So super quick reaction, which is prompted by what you said. You know, if you study the Silicon Valley and its success, and you have the typical blinders on, you'll think that it's, you know, Steve Jobs and individual inventors and Berkeley and Stanford. But if you actually study it, part of its tremendous success is the community college system, because the coders can drop back in and pick up a new skill as the market is changing and then go back to their firms. And this has been written about by Annalise Saxenian and a number of others. And I think that there's not a full understanding in California of how central the community college system is to workforce development and to continual retraining in a world in which occupations will be changing. Where else can you go back in for a short period of time or in evening courses and brush up in a way which makes you to continue to be valuable in your own workplace or to be able to surf through change? Somehow that's not breaking through to the rest of California. They think of the community colleges as either a feeder into the 4 years or picking up where things fell apart, rather than seeing it as being an essential part. I'm not joking or trying to make, I say the same thing when I'm speaking to universities, that community colleges are the real pearl in the system and that they ought to be lifted up a little bit more. And I think consistent with that, getting at the issue of rewards, I like to remind people that behind every software engineer is an army of nannies and gardeners and food service workers, and that those things actually go together. And if you are not rewarding the service industry that makes it possible for high tech to survive, you're not building an economy of mutuality, and you're not building an economy that will be able to persist in the long run. So another big myth we need to get, I mean, I just finished writing, Francisco, no, you were able to break into a writing retreat for a book. But in one part of the book I wrote, you know, if you took a software coder and you put them in a restaurant as a busboy, they would make the wages of a busboy. And if you took a bus person and you train them in coding, which is what you all do, or Bitwise and Fresno, et cetera, they'll make, and you put them in a firm, they will make the wages of a software coder. It's got a lot to do with the job and not with the person. And in fact, those jobs are interconnected. So we need to figure out how to lift up the bottom of the labor market. And with that, to the dean of the community college system, Dr. Bettis.
Thank you. President Bettis.
I just wanted to say I didn't really want to interrupt too much because you have a lot to do, but Dr. Pastor, thank you for this presentation. The one comment that resonated with me, being sort of a forerunner of affirmative action in the 60s and 70s, is our dream was to get more and more people of color into higher education so they can occupy those positions necessary. And You know, we didn't really see the connection clearly with labor, wage, and so forth. So I really appreciate your analysis, because you're right. It's a struggle. It'll continue, and we need to coalesce across those sectors. So thank you very much, Trustee Vettis. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for the affirmative action. It worked out.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Dr. Pastor. I appreciate your time. It was a true honor to have you here. And colleagues, we're going to take 5. We'll be back at 10:35 to go through our goals and objectives. And again, appreciate that. Thank you so much, Dr. Pastor.
Thank you.
Thank you. 5 minutes, right?
5 minutes, 10:35. Okay. Hello, everybody. Just wanted to check in. If we have quorum to get back started. Trustees, if you either can turn on your screen so I know you're there, or send a quick note, either way, through the chat, either way works for me. Student trustee, I got you. Trustee Henderson, Hoffman, Welna, Fong. Who are we missing now? Trustee Moreno. And you know what? I lost Bella off our screen here. Is there a log out there with him? Can we double check that with him? Trustee Moreno, are you back?
He's muted, but he's there.
Okay, sounds good. So if we can send a quick note to Trustee Vella, I think he's fallen off here, but we're gonna go ahead and get started, and hope that they can join us and there's not a technical issue with their connection to us. But again, colleagues, thank you for that, and thank you for coming back to us here on time. We want to kick off the 2021/22 goals planning part of the session here. And as I mentioned earlier, that we're continuing our relationship with Mr. Noah Brown and ACCT, who helped pull together our efforts last year. We had a chance with this group here to review the progress we've made on goals, our past set of goals, 19-19-20, on December 12th. And many of you know that we included many of those goals in our board self-evaluation as well as our chancellor evaluation. For those that may not remember, and I think all of us do, but I'll do it quickly for the sake of those that are watching us. Mr. Brown serves as the president and chief executive officer of the ACCT, Association of Community College Trustees, and has been at this role since 2005. But I think you've been with the association for a lot longer than that. So welcome back, Noah, and it's good to have you here. And let me see if Chancellor, do you want to say a few words before we pass it over to Noah for this part of the agenda?
Sure, I'll just add a few layers of context to what occurs next. To members of the board, this dialogue that you will have today is the beginning steps of continuing the work that we had last year, and signaling to me and to the staff the areas which you'd like to continue, further refine, develop, things to take off the list, then other areas that you would like to pursue, given the discussion that we've just had with Dr. Pastor, and other interests that might be germane to your role as trustees and to the mission of our colleges. So we're listening intently. It's not the time today. We will listen, take notes, and we will further refine what we think is a model. And we'll have a process of refinement until we agree on this is the body of work in which we will spend our time and attention in the year 2021. So we're looking forward to this conversation, and we're here as listeners, and of course to support your interest and your goals for the year. So with that, Mr. Brown, welcome to LACCD again. It's a wonderful to see you, and the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, President Veras and Chancellor Rodriguez, and hello again, members of the board. Yes, I feel like I was just here. I think we last met on Inauguration Day. I did go back and watch the recording, so I got up to speed after that. I'm pleased to continue working with you and this board. I think progress has been tremendous, and I'm very proud of the work that you have done around a framework. And I think the framework is what allows you to move forward in a consistent fashion now, and to really understand what's going on, what needs to be done, and how to benchmark progress going forward. So I'm going, I think, do I have the ability to share my screen?
Yes, you should be able to share your document.
All right, I'm going to do that. Everybody see this? Okay.
Yes, we do.
This is the obligatory title screen, so we can skip this one. What I'm going to do in the hour or so that I have today is I'm going to return to the grid that we developed, and I think we developed this over 2 years ago. And I'm going to go through and refresh the board's memory about where we are, and this sets the table for where you want to go. And let me just say parenthetically that presentation that I was privileged to view before the break was incredible. And hopefully that stimulated a lot of thinking in your minds about things that you may want to add or modify to your goals. Not just now while we're still in a pandemic, but clearly as we move forward to place the LA Community College District at the forefront of bringing greater equity and employability to people in the district. So I'm gonna explain this now. So you'll recall that we developed 4 priority areas. We'd actually developed 3, right? And then we added a 4th after the advent of the pandemic, which forced obviously the chancellor and a lot of people to pivot. So the first priority was ensuring district sustainability. And then as was shared back on December 12th, before you did your board self-evaluation and the chancellor's evaluation, you went through all these goals and you saw progress reports. So let me just explain now what you're looking at. I think I had mentioned probably in my first or second visit, the value of creating a grid which would allow you to easily benchmark. And I think I referenced a stoplight approach. So what you're seeing here, you're going to see greens, you're going to see yellows, and you're going to see reds. Greens are things that have been completed. And then you'll see those areas under the sub goals that are highlighted. We are also showing you what priority you, the board, gave to these items. And then you also see the board self-assessment average, right? We reviewed that the last time. This is how the board in aggregate reviewed these goals. And then you see status.
To remind everybody, that's on a scale of 1 to 5.
That's correct, yes. So some of these you're going to see a lot of variation. Variation just means that not every member of the board was in the same place in their individual evaluation. So these are the aggregates again. Then you see the status. And then I think the next piece over there is time frame. Time frame is one of the pieces that we'll need to fill in as we go forward. In other words, as we eliminate goals or take goals off, return to work on some that are pending or add new ones, we need to know what time frame the board expects the work to commence. So under these, the first slide you see, as was reported, all of these have been completed. They were completed under the plan that terminated the end of the year. Let's move on to the next set of sub goals. Again, we're still in ensuring district sustainability. Here you have a whole bunch of stuff where work began but isn't necessarily completed. So that's your yellow. You know, if you're driving and there's a stoplight, you can still, what we say is squeeze the lemon, but it means caution. So these are things that are still under development, but have not yet been completed. And so you can see what those are. So I'm assuming that unless the board,
Noah?
Yeah.
Is there any way just to increase font just a tad?
Oh, sure.
Some of us have ADA issues.
Yeah.
Gabriel, you can do it probably from your screen. If you look at on the top where it says you're viewing Noah Brown's ACCT screen under view options, you can enlarge it yourself, I think.
Oh, Trustee Hoffman, you're a miracle.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I'm trying to get rid of the,
Mr. Brown,
yeah.
on the lower right of your screen, right next to the minus sign, it's a presenter mode. It's 1, 2, 3, the fourth icon next to notes. It's right next to the minimizing on your lower right.
But I could see it now. Andra, that was very helpful. So you don't need to change it.
On the bottom, on the very bottom.
No, it'd be great just to do screen by screen instead of the thumb marks. You can, if you can get rid of the, I think that's what Crystal's pointing out to you. You can get rid of the thumb marks.
It's the fourth icon right where you were at the bottom next to notes.
Yeah,
The fourth icon there is the presenter mode. Number 4. So 2 more down, the next one, there you go.
That's it.
Ah, thank you.
Thanks,
I'm
Crystal.
slow, but I'll get there eventually.
No problem.
Okay, is this better?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. So again, the set of sub goals now under assuring district sustainability, you have all of these that are still in progress. You'll see the first set were rated medium priority the last time we did this work. District Educational Services Center. The next one, district organizational chart, was rated very high the last time by the board. And then land development acquisition was rated medium. And so all of these, according to the year-end report that the chancellor submitted that we reviewed with you, are still considered in progress. And so one question for the board to be thinking about as we build the goals for 2021, if you want to keep these and move them into the new plan, and or if you want to change their priority or modify them. Moving on, again, we're still in ensuring district sustainability. Sub-goal area, teaching effectiveness. Again, a very high priority for the board. Item 38 has been reported as completed. Again, the board gave this a pretty high rating of a 3.6 in terms of how you viewed this. The next goal, ensure all teaching evaluations are conducted. It was reported that this is still in progress. Next one, offer professional development. That was reported completed under the previous plan. Then the next one we move to is strengthening understanding of board duties and responsibilities. This includes risk mitigation, principles of leadership, and so forth. Obviously a high priority. Again, these are reported as still ongoing priorities. So one of these is continue board development around your accrediting standard, very important. Continuing the work around annual board self-evaluation. I assume that the board desires to continue to have annual self-evaluation. Continuing to review your committee structure, also very important. And one facet of reviewing a board committee structure that we've talked about in the past is laying out clear goals and expectations for your committees. And to give them specific timelines in order to complete their work around the big goals. So that's very important also. Priority area 2, addressing student basic needs. In the area of student support services, we have 2 areas that are still ongoing. Work with LA Metro to establish subsidized university student Metro Pass. Again, these were rated very high priorities by the board. Secondly, coordinate with city and county agencies around food, housing, food referrals, and resources. that work continues. And I would say that the board self-assessment score of a 3.67 indicates that generally the board is feeling pretty confident that this is moving forward in a way that you would like it to see. And then bolster a program's support for student volunteers. This was reported as completed under the last plan. Moving on into student housing partnerships. Again, a very high priority of the board. Conduct a student housing demand study, feasibility study. Again, that's reported as ongoing in progress. The next one, a craft post-student
I have a
housing.
quick question.
Yeah.
Trustee Vettis, would you prefer questions at the end, or could we ask that as they're coming
Well,
up?
if it's on stuff like size and clarifications of a slide, that's one thing. But if
It'll
it's
be clarification.
clarification's cool, and if it's something like to prioritize the goals, we're going to do that after the presentation.
Got it. Oh, okay, this is one clarification. On 47, conduct student housing demand study and feasibility study. That has a 3.7. I'm sorry, 3.17.
Yeah.
I'm not understanding. I'm not sure that that occurred at all. Maybe partially. Maybe I missed something. How could that? Did we do that? Or did we think we did it?
Well, let me say this, because the board self-eval assessment, we actually may have different understandings of how this is, because we've actually done feasibility studies in the past. So I think that's just a clarification amongst ourselves, because we could be looking at the old study that a few of us were a part of versus sort of the new, conversation that may require this to be updated. So I think this is, Trustee Bono, you pointed out well, because this is something that I think we have to maybe refine our collective understanding of what that means.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's a good question. My understanding is that either something has been occurring or it continues to be a priority. It's obviously not complete, but a 3.17 score from the entire board indicates there's some understanding or appreciation that it's not only important, but that there is some work or an expectation of some work is going to occur, which is why we're keeping it on this list, because I think, as you point out, we need some clarity for the year going forward. Sorry. The next one, craft post-student housing proposal, if warranted. Reported here that this has not been done. So that may be something that the board wants to reprioritize and move into 21. So keep that one in mind. Identify potential public-private partnerships. Again, this is still ongoing. The self-assessment score would indicate certainly that the board feels that this hasn't moved to a point of maturity, or certainly is not close to being completed at this point. Coordinate with city and county housing referral resources. This was reported as having been completed.
I point something out on this one, is that maybe, and I have to give Ms. Velos a lot of credit for this, but should this one be completed but ongoing? Because it just can't be completed. You get what I mean? Like, yeah. I don't know how it's not continue. Like, I agree with completed, but it's also ongoing, because it needs to be reoccurring. We're just going to point that out.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. Some of these things, while we got the work done, or the board or the administration got this work done under last year's grid, that doesn't mean that it can't be put on the plan going forward. Those are things the board needs to decide. So you may want to do this again in the coming year. Make sure that you're still understanding and on the same page with this one. It's perfectly appropriate. Priority 3, which was creating greater equity and inclusion. Student and community outreach focus. All the various groups that are priorities for the board in terms of outreach. This one obviously still very much in progress. I think in view of the presentation we heard in the last hour, this work in some ways is never complete. It has to constantly be on your list, and you have to constantly understand and benchmark where the progress is within the district. But the board self-assessment score, which is fairly high at 3.67, suggests that at least the majority of the board is feeling pretty positive about where this is moving. But again, much more work can be done there in the new year. Around growing enrollment, craft-specific outreach plan, that was reported completed. Expand the LA College Promise enrollment. Very high score here. Obviously, the board is very positive and feeling very confident about what was done this past year. Expand online enrollment. Again, high degree of confidence that this work is moving forward and the board understands and appreciates what's being done.
But this was pre-COVID.
Well, that's a good question because we assessed all of this in real time post-COVID. Now, remember that we have another fourth area that is COVID specific. So again, as we continue to move through COVID and beyond, these are things that you may want to slide over in 21 and give them a different emphasis. So again, these are things to be thinking about. Expand adult education and non-credit education. Work was done in the previous period there. Monitor district college milestones on 5-year strategic plan. Obviously, there was work done. But if you look at this score and the previous score for adult education non-credit, Chancellor, I would suggest that as we move into the new plan, these are a couple areas where I think the board needs some more understanding and maybe some more benchmarks.
Yes, may I interject a quick comment here? Yes, thank you for that. One is doing a better job of communicating that. But the also piece, what may be occurring here is that because the overall enrollment went down in the fall, and this was almost an 15 to 18 month cycle, if you consider the work. So it overlapped a year and then some, because we reviewed this and pulled the data from fall of 2020, presented it to the board on December. So a little bit of overlap of a couple of cycles. Could be that, and then we grew by just under 1% last year in 2019, 2020. Finally, it stopped the slide that had been going on for many years. And then we saw a 10% increase in enrollments in the past summer. Then this fall, when the full impact of COVID hit and all the other measures and circumstances that were discussed earlier, we saw a 10% drop this year so far. And for the semester that begins in just a couple of days, that trend is continuing. So that's obviously we're concerned about that. So it could be that the scores, I don't know this, but the board was the general notion that enrollments were down this fall. But if you look at the micro enrollments, I'm expanding online opportunities. That was indeed done. Expanding College Promise, going after adult learners, where we've done much, much more than every college, and it did expand that. Did not supersede the leakage that took place as a result of COVID. So I wanted to at least that perspective as the board considers 2021.
Yeah, and so, apropos the presentation in the last hour, the board may want to kind of disaggregate some of these goals around enrollment and add some more specificity in the wake of COVID and what you've been experiencing. So there's clarity about the overall expectation, not only for enrollment, but when you say enrollment, what specifically are you referencing? And which constituencies will you want to target and how will you want to think about benchmarking and evaluating progress in this coming year? You know, hopefully by this summer, perhaps we'll get back to some sense of normalcy. But you should really think about how specific you want to be in terms of some of these targets in this new planning and goal setting year. Engage in college program viability studies. That's ongoing. So that's something, again, that may slide into the new year. And just a reminder on all of these things, the board can recast or add nuance to some of these things or shift some of the sub goals appropriately. Because the more that the board does that, the better able you will be to actually assess progress and see what's going on. Still finishing up on priority 3, administration faculty hiring. Develop President's Academy in 2020 for district leadership succession. Not completed. I don't know if you want to comment, Chancellor. I'm going to guess that, you know, other events probably overtook the district this past year, but that may be a goal and something that the board and the administration wants to work on in this coming year.
Correct. The last time we did this, the inaugural President's Academy was in 2016. So 5-year period since then is a good juncture for leadership succession. So should the board want to engage in that, we could accommodate that this year. Now that we have, you know, normalized the environment that we're in, if I could use that word in quotations.
Can I interject?
Go ahead, Mr. Moreno.
Yeah. I think we don't want to be rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic here. But we've declined fall to fall, spring to spring, forget the summer and those interim sessions. Those aren't not as critical as the fall to fall, spring to spring. And I say we've declined before the current situation. We were declining for 5 years now, practically. So on top of that major decline of last year and prior to that, we declined another from spring to spring about 18%. Before we go any further and behave as though we have a flood of students, we need to talk about the reality of our future. If this enrollment doesn't change, and clearly we're overstaffed. So rather than hiring, we may be talking about reductions because all the current information we have indicates we are consistently going downward and have been going downward even prior to the pandemic. So we need to go about addressing that issue in the backdrop of all of our future goals.
No, thank you, Trustee. And I wanted to say that, and I know your comments were going to be brief there, but I would just wanted to, you know, let the board know we're just going to get this presentation first, clarification points or sort of pointing out nuances, issues, and that kind of stuff can happen here. But at the end of this presentation is like your comment, Trustee Moreno, in terms of prioritizing and upscaling and downscaling certain priorities. Wanted to have that take place right after this. You know, where priority 4 is coming up quick, so we'll be digging into that dialogue deeper there. But certainly your point is noted. But I just wanted to let everybody know so we can get through this piece and get into the full debate of those kinds of things right after the priority 4 presentation. Okay, go ahead, Noah.
Okay. So 2 final ones here, offering equity implicit bias training and also establish a PC board liaison. These are in progress. They're also, the scores, again, relatively high, indicate that the board as a whole has understanding of these things are moving forward and they're seeing things come about. But again, these are not completed. I mean, my own personal opinion on number 60, which is equity and implicit bias, I don't know that that ever is completed. I think that's something that has to continue on and on and on. The board may view it the same way there. Then we had priority 4, which, as we reviewed the last time, this wasn't even in our grid when we developed this toward the end of 19. But thanks to the chancellor and the district, we integrated this to show the board all the pivots that had to be made because of the pandemic. And so I think, as you see from this chart, a lot of work was done in the short term to successfully pivot. Obviously, shifting to remote learning, remote work environment, that was done for the most part. And the scores here suggest that the board as a whole agreed with that, saw it, experienced it, felt pretty confident that these things had been done. Again, develop and coordinate communications, safety protocols, prepare recovery plans, information technology support, strengthen IT infrastructure, maintain campus health and safety. All of these significant work occurred this past year when the district had to pivot. Response to civil unrest and racial injustice and inequity. Again, another critical pivot point that we didn't anticipate, obviously, even back in March necessarily, as the pandemic was unfolding. Create a framework for racial equity and social justice. Significant work occurred in that area. Again, board self-assessment score indicates that there is a good degree of confidence that this work was occurring. The next two, review human resources, law enforcement, student leadership development. These are not yet complete, but given the board self-assessment score, some appreciation that work has been transpiring in these areas. Explore expansion of ethnic studies program and general education requirement. Again, movement there, not yet complete. When I say not yet complete, I'm talking on behalf, from the board's perspective, that these are things, these are aspirational things that you want, and more work might continue there. Then create Chancellor's Advisory Committee on Black African American Student Affairs. That was reported completed. That's a very high score, which indicates the board is in concurrence, generally speaking, that this actually was completed. And then lastly, provide opportunities for professional growth and development. Largely completed there, also a fairly high board assessment score of a 3.67. So that's a lot to keep in mind. But that was a look at where the board is in terms of the goals that you established back in 2019, and then with the addition of the pivot that had to occur earlier last year with the pandemic. So there are a lot of things that were done, I think, and the board recognizes that. Might suggest that some of those things come off your list now, and that you pivot into looking at areas that are not complete, but more importantly, adding some new goals and priorities as you move forward this year. Obviously, enrollment was mentioned, so one might suggest that some more drilling down into that issue and how the board wants to establish some goals this year around that area is important. And then I'll just say, in view of that presentation prior to the break, I think that had a lot of rich information that I hope stimulated the board's thinking about how you might want to set some new goals or tweak your existing goals around bringing greater equity, preparation for work, not just now, but beyond pandemic. So that's where we are relative to early February. So what we want to be able to do now is engage with you about things that we want to roll into 21 now. But more importantly, what are some new areas, some new sub goals under your 4 main priority areas that you want to add for this year? Again, what we want to be able to do on an annual basis is to return to this, assess progress, move things off the grid as we add new things to the grid so we can keep a dynamic progress going forward. And as you learned this past year, this sets the table for not only the board evaluating its own work, but more importantly, how you evaluate your chancellor on an annual basis based on these goals and the completion. So President Veres, let me stop here and let's see how the board would like to proceed.
Noah, is there a slide that sort of put the 4 goals together? And what I'd like to do is go through each trustee and we have just about an hour left or so, and I wanted to give everybody an opportunity to speak to any of the goals from last year that were presented, allow you to go into sub goals, make comments on goals, prioritization, thought processes, urgency levels, and then at the same time, whatever's not covered here, to give you an opportunity to include some of those things. So let me do this. I'm going to take the chair's prerogative and offer 1 on my side, and then I'll do the rest at the end of everyone else. But I did want to pull out, and I'll say this from we're going to go through everybody, so don't worry about raising your hand. I'll just run through it as it shows up on my view gallery here. But everybody would have a chance equally to be able to speak to any number of these features. But I wanted to get at, if we can go to the AB 705 one, and that's in the instruction piece. And I know this has to be parsed out in a few different ways. I know we sort of listed here, craft the prior slide. The way we describe it is craft a plan of action and data results. I know we indicate that it's completed. But there's a couple of things that I wanted to sort of note. One, we have continuing and ongoing concerns raised by the Academic Senate about the impact to students, and maybe as a continuing issue. And I'm going to say this, and I do think COVID has presented some lost learning. It's at the K through 12 level, and certainly at our level. And some of the things that we were crafting in terms of plan of actions included the way we support our students. And some of that was actually to be taken place in person and supported by digital resources, but obviously we completely wiped out the in-person piece. So as opposed to, perhaps we can say the plan of action and the data discussions for last year have occurred, I think we have to sort of reset this conversation and understand how learning loss or lost learning, however is the best way to describe it, in the COVID space, and the lack of in-person support systems have really impacted our remedial / instructional process, and to really sort of assess completion, non-completion. I'll point out, I know we've had challenging stats when it comes to mathematics. We've had positive stats when it comes to our core math classes, but as comparison to statistics classes, where we've seen some positive numbers. But to be able to sort of continue to assess, continue to understand, and then really take into account the lost learning and the virtual experience that has eliminated at least a couple of our in-person tool spaces there. So I wanted to sort of bring that up to the table in terms of a goal, and not view it as a completed issue, but to sort of get a chance to revisit what happened in learning loss. And some of the numbers from LACCD, for example, are extremely challenging in terms of, especially when the students are a little bit older, attending class and follow. So whatever happens at that level coming to us, I don't know if we have a great hold of it. And what we're doing and what we've laid out as some of our strategies, definitely were impacted. I mean, not having tutorial labs and not having all that in-person support system accessible to our students is kind of rough, and I don't want to minimize that need there. So I'll state that one as one, and then I'd like to see if I can jump into the colleague list, and so we'll try to go through everyone. If there's sort of cross comments, if you can save it for your moment. If you've already spoken, you want to bring up something, let's just be mindful to get everybody a chance to speak, and then I can come back and do another circle of this, or another round of this, I should say. So let me start off with Trustee Hoffman for your comments, questions, prioritizations, and other feedback.
Thank you, President Veras. So initially I have two thoughts, and I want to go back to what Trustee Veras was saying on the slide with, I think moving forward, we've been thinking of AB 705 and workforce and, career development and transfer in silos. And I think we have a real opportunity now to really hone in on guided pathways and make sure, and I'd like this to be a goal for all of us, to make sure that the path is clear for students and that we integrate AB 705, our workforce programs and transfer sort of into one goal, because I think that would be, number one, easier for students, and it is a movement, and we are going to be required to go in that direction. So I'd like to see more work done in that area. And then can you go to the slide with student basic needs? I think we had a bunch of stuff on there. The thing that we're not talking about, and I don't know if it fits into student basic needs or in some other area, and I really want it codified, and I know we sort of brought it up because we met at the Family Resource Center when we did one of our goal setting sessions, and you remember, Noah. I really think we need to do more for student parents. It's become very apparent that many of our students, while that's not the first way they identify with us, they are parenting children under the age of 18 in the home, and this remote environment has really exacerbated some of their challenges. So if we can build a goal around extra support for student parents, and whether that fits into some of these areas under student basic needs, I think that's great, but I would like to see that codified and in writing. And then again, under student basic needs, and I recognize housing is super important, but we also need to somewhere in there do more for broadband and Wi-Fi access and technology. So those are just some of my initial thoughts. Thank you for calling on me first.
Okay, yeah, sure. It's by luck of the screen placement here. So next, Trustee Fong.
Thank you so much, President Veras, and thank you, Noah, for the presentation. When I was looking at the enrollment chart for LA College Promise Growth, adult ed opportunities, adult learners, for me, I think anything that we can do to add some metrics, some goals, some data points as well going forward, I think those are some opportunities that College Promise is one of the growth areas that we've had as an organization, as a district. And as we look to continue to build out not just LA College Promise, but with our neighboring school districts and other feeder districts, I think there's an opportunity for us to really expand on this. So we'd like to see, in addition to LA College Promise, some additional metrics on this. And when I look at this goal, it says connectivity to workforce as well. To echo Trustee Hoffman's comments, I think the career pathways and other guided pathways, and just some additional maybe a goal on creating a number of workforce recruit technical education programs, whether it's at the campus level or on the district level. And I know we should capture this information as well, but when we look at the aggregate, and especially as we come out of this pandemic-induced recession, I think there's an opportunity for us to highlight our CTE programs. So that's something that I would want to continue to push for and advocate for there as well. And then on ethnic studies, thank you for to all my colleagues and everyone for their work and efforts around that. I know on the legislative front, we're really trying to push the Assemblymember Almer Suchi bill, AB 3310. So I think there's additional opportunities for us as a organization to codify what we're doing around ethnic studies, and that as a opportunity as well. And then around student housing partnerships, there's been work done there with Early Ribbon Board, with Shower Hope, and other organizations, but I think there's another opportunity for us to really take it to the next level. And as Mr. President Bettis said, there were some housing studies that were done around West LA College, around Pierce College, and I believe the third one was City College, but I'm not sure if there's been housing assessments done across the district, so want to see how we can codify that in terms of a metric going forward as well to look at the demand study. So those are some of my initial comments. Lastly, on the student community outreach, I think everyone's pretty much sheltering in place, but sometimes we do drive somewhere every now and then. And I listened to the radio recently, and I heard some commercials for LA Valley College. So kudos to Valley College for really advertising out there. But I think when we look at our district-wide approach to marketing our schools and really making sure that we're marketing not just Valley College, but all our campuses, that everyone knows that we're open, that we're accessible, and that we continue to embrace the hopes and aspirations of our students as we come out of this pandemic. I want to see what we can look at in terms of district-wide marketing plan. So I know there's been a lot of work done on that, and so I think just codifying here as well on the community outreach side would be a good next step as well. Thank you so much, Mr. President.
Okay, thank you. Trustee Henderson, we'll call on you next, and then after that, Trustee Bowman.
President Barris, my comments are just very general since we're not making decisions and setting goals today. But in light of Dr. Pastor's presentation and the realities of our district, I hope that as we move forward looking at goals, that we don't continue to add goals to this list when we have so many in progress. And some of the goals that have been completed, that we can kind of perhaps, some that are like, as Trustee Vela stated, are stated completed, but are, or Trustee Buelna, stated completed but ongoing, that we go back and review them through that racial equity and social justice lens, and considering the intersectionality of our students and how, we're looking at being in this situation of remote work and remote learning for an extended period of time, that we start to look at some of those items and apply that to those things that have been completed, that are ongoing, and the items that are in progress, and really look at them with some intentions, really being intentional about who these specific items impact and how we can best address their needs. Because I think we've been approaching the situation as if we are Burger King and can meet everybody's need. And we should focus on what we do and what we can do effectively, and then work with building community partners. Thank you.
Okay. Trustee Buelna, and then after Trustee Buelna, Trustee Vela. You're on mute, Trustee Buelna.
I want to ditto what Trustee Henderson just said about kind of including the concepts that were included by Professor Pastor. Before I get into the strategic, I think Trustee Bettis, you mentioned about the difficulty students are having with learning. And Trustee Hoffman has brought up this issue before, and I don't really understand it, but I think it might be important because I've heard it be an issue, that we've had a lot of students that are having issues with school, and especially K through 12. So on the issue of repeatability, do we need a any policy change or thinking with regard to some of the damage that occurred with learning in this last year. And as we move out of that process, that students, that we're able to work with students in order to kind of make that, have that fix, right? Without it being a permanent record on students because of COVID, right? Because we don't want COVID ultimately to affect long-term educational outcomes, which they could, right? So it's a larger discussion. I'm sure I didn't frame it correctly, but I wanna okay, no, Trustee Hoffman put something in the statement. But I think even though Trustee Hoffman, I saw what you put down, but I think as a larger strategy, I get that it's a detail, but as a larger strategy, how do we fix a lot of the mass issues that we had that were accentuated? Okay, that was one. Professor Pastor also, he mentioned something I thought was important. He said, blue sky, big trends. And with regard to those big sky blue trends, you know, and I brought it up before, and let me just be very clear. We have, in this district, we have, you know, extreme capacity, right? In terms of our presidents, vice presidents, deans, and everything. But one thing that I still haven't seen, I haven't seen a enrollment kind of blue sky trends. And that when we had this conversation a few weeks ago with Mr. Brown, there were some trends that are being identified by ACCT. And my concern, if we don't have a large strategic approach that is clearly identified, that then all the tactics can feed from, kind of like that you know, big trends, blue sky. And just like we did with when we, in our building program, you know, can we get any outside assistance in helping in that developing that big blue sky approach? The last thing is Professor Pastor showed different charts, and the charts were all over the place. You know, one of the things, you know, we saw no chart where everyone was equal, you know, in that chart. You know, so I would say that our strategic approach to handling all of these issues should be based on how do we get as LACCD an equality of those charts, like, you know, and I'll lay down those strategic approaches, you know, so they can guide, because once we come to an agreement on do we want that, right, and how do we get that, how do we target our resources, everything else I think will tend to fall in line. Thank you, and that's it.
Okay, Trustee Bona, and next I had Trustee Vela and then Trustee Moreno.
Thank you so much, Noah, for going over this, you know, what we've all kind of come to know and be familiar with for the last 2 years. I kind of just quickly wanted to add, I think we brought it up last time, and about, you know, and Noah, I think you know, you and I, when we first met, had a little bit of you know, difference in opinion, Trustee Hoffman too, as far as our role as trustees, and the more educated I'm getting and governing, I understand that it could be a good thing to be the policy setter, not the implementer, and I think we all agree that's important. So with that being said, if we look at this through the lens of, you know, are some of these goals district specific? I would like to have a little, like, maybe a column that it would say, you know, this is more district, and maybe have another column that where it could be checked, is this more at the college level? But you know, I still want to know if they're going to be doing it at the college level. But, you know, for me, it's important as a trustee to not seem so micromanaging to the college presidents. I think one of the things I'm noticing about college presidents, they're very, very important to this whole operation. And I think that I'm getting to know this as I govern. So if we could, and I'm not saying a call, maybe just a check, it's more district driven versus college driven. I think we still need to keep enrollment. I think it's extremely important. I think it's going to be with us for a very long time, especially after the pandemic. And so we just heard from the USC professor, I forget his last name now. I'm sorry. It's President Vettis, help me here.
Pastor, Manuel.
Yeah, Dr. Pastor. That it's going to be more of a remote. People are still going to want remote learning, and so I want to say that enrollment, I think, is going to be important from the lens of absolutely how improved and how robust our remote learning will continue to be. Its quality as well, and I feel like we're in the right track when it comes to infrastructure, when it comes to getting the quality remote learning capability. So I'm excited about that. I do think that I do think we need to continue to invest in and we'll probably set that tone later. And I think Chancellor Rodriguez, you've been already hearing this from me a little bit too much, but just to really utilize social media as a way to boost enrollment. And then also some of the nice perks out there, like guaranteed admissions programs and pathways to Trustee Hoffman's. I like pathways. I think they created a pretty big impact over at East LA College that I know personally because we did dual enrollment and articulation there with my old K-12 school district. So kudos to that. Absolutely basic needs. We still need to have it. I believe, it's up to us, to all of us as a team, but I do believe basic needs is important. I like we talked about student housing and, putting more of an emphasis on student housing partnerships. By the way, the beauty of partnerships is they could actually include, getting vouchers. It could include putting our students in another, in a shared facility, home. But it also could include ourselves going into, partnering with someone to build housing off campus or whatever we wish. And then finally, with which was touched upon earlier too, and I don't even know if we really have it here concretely, but the outreach portion, I know we talked about African American and LGBT, and again, going in the right direction. But I also see this as continuing to be important as we move forward with aggregate data and information about what types of communities we're serving. And I just can see that that's going to be something that we're going to really need to be, honest with ourselves of those communities. To Trustee Henderson's point, it's recognized we have a very diverse African-American community as well. And, in learning more about Black History Month, the traditional migration, diaspora from the South, African Americans, and now having African Americans that are Mexicano, that are, all sorts of different African American communities, which, again, I'm excited about. We learned today about Pacific Islanders being very hurt a lot more by COVID. So those are some of the things. I think we're in the right track, but I would like to continue to see them and discuss with my colleagues. But pretty much everything else is right on track. As discussed, discussing it. And I really do, just one example, student housing partnerships, when we talk about coordinating with city and county housing referral resources, I would give it a 4.0, even higher. I think we've been doing that successfully. And I'm really excited about that. But anyway, thank you guys.
Okay, sounds good. Trustee Moreno, and I know you began your conversation. I didn't mean to cut you off. I think you got most of it through last time, but if you wanted to expound on that or add other comments, I'm going to give you the opportunity now.
Well, I do think though that I guess my comments weren't that valuable because I an example of student housing. We're facing a situation where we don't know what we're going to look like when we come out of this COVID situation. we are going to be different. But the reality is that our current structure does not handle the requirements that we're going to be facing. We need to go about readjusting how we operate. It was somewhat shocking to me, but not shocking in the same. It was shocking that we were unaware of this, but I was aware of it. I felt is that the technology was not available to our student body in this Hispanic and African American community. There was a lot of assumptions that it was, and we went about enrolling people or trying to enroll people based upon that false assumption. I'm glad to see there's some statistical support for my view on the matter. But more importantly, I do think we need to go about focusing on issues that have a positive impact on a student's ability to earn an income at the conclusion of his or her experience with us. Far too frequently enroll people with moving into disciplines that really don't have any likelihood of successful employment. I think that the example your parents had and all those people who attended trade tech at a time when trade tech was renowned for that kind of thing was not an accident. That they honestly believed, I think, that the time that they were going to get some legitimate skills that allowed them to be an entering labor market. That I think we've lost. I'd like to return to that moment in time, but it's going to take a lot of our district to do that. Trade tech is maybe ahead, but it's lost some of its focus because for a while there it was moving away from the vocational side. But again, this is of course, all of it's up for further discussion. That's all I have to say. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Trustee. I do have a few comments, and then we'll leave it for another potential round and either cross communications and et cetera here. So well, a couple things. One, I mentioned 705 earlier, but I also wanted to connect to some of our teaching space and the fact that we went so quickly. So now if we can go into our sustainability piece, and I believe it was in our instruction area. Let's see, where is it? There it is, teaching effectiveness. I know we've laid out evaluations, we've laid out, but I wanted to look at this professional development one more time. And I say that because when we went remote, I think a lot of our, there is a divide between those who had been remote specialists, distance learning specialists, and the kind of training and the kind of support that they receive. So I think even though we've gone like 90-some% online, really only 20% of that were people that were experienced in the remote environment and really sort of understand what it meant to be an online and remote teacher. And although we're, at some point getting back to in-person, hopefully sooner rather than later, when it's safe, there's probably still going to be an ongoing and continuing remote learning situation. And we may never be down to 17-18% of what it was, and maybe much larger than that. But in the professional development space, and although we indicate completed, I think most of what we were able to sort of provide our faculty was tech support, literally like how to use Zoom, as opposed to the sort of teaching quality space of what it means to be able to engage and continue to have high level learning in the remote environment. So, I'd like to think in the teaching space, teaching effectiveness space, this actually may be a skill from here forward that's necessary. And I'm not going to sort of undersell that, once we get past this pandemic, nothing like this is going to continue. But this, whether it's disaster, remote space, or if it's just becoming part, because some people may actually really enjoy a remote space in the future. And, if we don't continue to have some portion of our offerings be there for convenience or for whatever, it's important. But quite a bit of depth and confusion over remote and the various forms, whether it was live or whether it was pre-recorded for students to access whenever. Just that quality of of the teaching that we were doing there, and at the same time, how we support our professionals to grow and develop that. There isn't an equivalent for a teaching certificate at the community college level. Sometimes I'm reflecting on a conversation I had with Trustee Henderson a little while ago, where you get a lot of comment on K through 12 because of the certification process of how you teach, not about what you teach. We're a little bit more focused on what we're teaching as opposed to how we're teaching. But I think in that remote, there's a learning gap and professional development opportunity that we should really contemplate. So in this effectiveness piece, I think that's going to be a valuable conversation for us to have. The next point I wanted to go to is on our in our COVID piece, priority 4. And I think, are we, and just to be clear, are we viewing recovery plans? I know we tagging underneath recovery plans, return to in-person instruction. And maybe, I guess the clarification I'm looking for is, in terms of a priority, is to really understand what is going to trigger return to in-person. Now, I say that is, and I say that with a bit of sort of frustration on my part, because, I watch, dining open and close a few times in the last 6 months. I watched some of it trying to, where people are asking, what's the science to opening and closing? And, I've watched a recent opening where, the restaurant industry complained about, well, what's the science to reopen now after after demanding for the science to close? I would generally not to, like to have us be in a situation where we're quote unquote opening and closing. I think, there is some challenge with the way the vaccine is rolling out. It's an emergency vaccine. So also we're not going to be required, there's not a mandate for it. So not everybody's going to be forced to take it based on the emergency protocols that are there. But, is it that we're going to wait for a public health official to declare that the number, perhaps it's when 80% of the population gets vaccinated, then we believe it's safe to return. So I don't know, I think as we sort of come back to in-person, if we can, if it's not the recovery plan or if it's a fine tuning of the recovery plan, but there's an element of working with our, obviously with all of our bargaining units, because they have the workplace components to their contracts that we have. If it's relating to getting more feedback and guidance from the states, I'll use the example of K through 12. There's certain private and parochial schools that have already returned to in-person because they followed what's been laid out by County Public Health, while, like, for example, LA Unified, and for those of us that may be watching the lobbying of words between LAUSD and LACCD, or at least one LACCD council member over the last few days about, quote unquote, a threat to sue to open. And not that I even want to even venture into those areas, but I do believe that at some point we're going to get to this point, whether it's 70%, 75, 80, 85, whatever that marks, we just can't flip the switch and do it right away. We're going to do this session by session. We're going to do it whether it's, maybe a target for the fall, maybe for the target of starting off in 2022. The way we look at it and the way we start compiling information, that when the public health deems it as safe, or maybe even the word is safe enough, what does that mean to us? And so in our sort of general conversation here, not only do we have our outside engagement with public health and with everybody else who's sort of governing safety for us, but we're also going to have our inside engagement with our workforce. So how we list and how we prioritize, I think it's going to be really important, especially if the vaccination effort speeds up and we start seeing 50, 60, 70% of the population having received the vaccination by the end of summer, and certainly a higher number hopefully by the end of 2021, of what that means to move forward. And that's going to happen probably in the span of the year that we lay out these goals and objectives here. So 2 more points, and then I'll pass the baton here again for others if they like it. In terms of Dr. Pastor's comments, he made the point. I've been thinking on this concept of resilient and essential work that continues to be important, that hopefully provides family sustaining wages. And certainly the remote environment and how that happens and all the work that can be remoted and that kind of thing is interesting. But there's quite a bit of training we do in public health and in health that, sometimes we may be too specialized in. I've been frustrated in some of our, for example, our nursing programs that have only been focused on RN. And speaking as a child of an LVN trained at LHA Tech, we don't do that very much anymore. Even the entry-level nursing position, CNA, I think my mom's first certificate was as a CNA, onto an RN or onto an LVN. And I think it was at 49 when she decided, even though I'm taking classes to be an RN, I don't think this is going to happen. And I'm going to, just focus on work. But, a 49-year-old, 50-year-old, that's an okay decision because it did already have the impact of getting into this work area that she enjoyed. And certainly did have an impact in terms of family sustaining wages for us. But to understand what more can we do in public health, I very much believe that in the near future and maybe long-term future, health is going to continue to be an important industry for our students to be trained in and pathwayed into, and to really view all of the programs that we offer and be able to, if there's a growth area for us to recruit. So as long as there's still private colleges, especially on the lower end, digging into these areas and capturing students and bringing them into debt sometimes, I think we have growth capacity here. Now, the challenge with nursing for us, of course, is it's a very expensive endeavor. It's a student to faculty ratio that is sometimes can be cost impactful for the college. And I think we view it sometimes as our social service to the society at large, but there's also several other areas that can be developed and refined a whole lot more. And, granted, so much now with the way that vaccinations and testing, all the kinds of training necessary to do those things may not necessarily be at our level, but maybe other kinds of areas in the health industry. And certainly I think we had an extra need for respiratory therapy, considering just the way that this virus and disease work. But to see us in terms of our goals and academic programs, and maybe it's just a complete assessment across the board of what we're doing as an institution for public health, whether it's practitioners, health educators, et cetera, and all the related fields that are there. And then the last point I'll get to it, and certainly, student housing probably needs general conversation. I won't get into that now, but several of my colleagues have sort of indicated as a priority, and I continue to share, and we'll want to engage in the future there. But there's something that Mr. Moreno has mentioned in the past, and something that I think we've talked about quite a bit. There is no sort of guiding framework for us as a board that pulls together the way we get funded, whether it's through the basic core of our funding through Sacramento is enrollment, is student success, and it's student equity, and enrollment being the biggest tranche of that. But I think, to really understand when we get budget updates and presentations, because a lot of what Mr. Moreno's comments have been to the connection to enrollment to budget, and essentially staffing levels is connected intimately to budget, since such a high percentage of our budget goes directly into our staff. But to really sort of understand the framework, what we're getting this year from Sacramento, what we're getting from the federal government and COVID relief, we're getting a lot of one-time funds in the context of when we normally hire staff, we make a long-term commitment to staff. These are ongoing and long-term budget decisions we make. But like I said, I think Sacramento and even the federal government is recognizing enrollment is getting impacted by COVID. People are giving us the sort of reprieves and the sort of hold harmless scenarios, and ultimately Sacramento this year, it's kind of an interesting opportunity where the Sacramento budget does have some what they were calling windfall or more excess than expected. But it's interesting because if you take it that comes out of higher income earners paying more taxes, but we service the lower income earners and the essential workers. So whereas the Sacramento budget is going to be a little bit robust, and we have an opportunity to be stable and not have necessarily budget cuts. how that money comes in and how it moves and what we do is really important. But just how to, whether there's a framework or there's a move piece, and not to dismiss, comments about when enrollment declines, what do we do with staffing? We have other mitigating circumstances that are making those conversations a little bit different. But if there's a way for us, Chancellor, and know what to think about, and maybe this is the kinds of things to take place in our budget committee, where we can see that how, variable A impacts, the outcomes here a little bit more, as opposed to just the budget's in positive or this is our reserve. And then separate that out with this is our enrollment and this is our increase or decrease. And to see how those two ideas or two, sort of interdependent issues are combined together in the way that we make, decision making with, short-term and long-term monies. So, just trying to find a tool to really understand and not to, dismiss the comment that Mr. Moreno makes, but to also understand the fact that whereas enrollments come down, our budget's been stable. And usually those two things used to go hand in hand, and they're just not going to hand in hand right now because of the other, circumstances and other impacts to that. So, but it is an important sort of feature to be a well-run institution, to have a real good sense as to, the factors that impact your budget and long-term balancing of that budget to be. So, so those are my comments. But colleagues, I wanted to open it up again for clarification or additional comments, and I'll take these by hand raising, and then Chancellor, if there was anything that you wanted to comment, or Noah, and if we go through that and we still have time, I knew we have attendees too. If there's folks that do want to make comments, I'll open it after this additional round here too. So, so let's go. I see 3 hands up. We'll Trustee Buolna, Hoffman, and Vela in that order. And if there's anybody else, please use that feature. So, Trustee Buolna.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I want to say, with regard to one, just for a point of order, are we going to go through these and do something with them, or after we speak? That's not my comment, but I just have that quick question. Yeah. Okay.
So the other, so Trustee Bonner, Noah is and his team are taking notes, and they're going to include, and we're going to have a refined document coming forward to us, and then we're going to continue to do these sessions together to, fine tune. And so if you have additional comments that you don't say now, I'll encourage you to, shoot Noah an email, let him be able to incorporate these kinds of, thought processes. And at some point, I'd love to be able to take a vote to accept this as our document to work on, sure, so that we're all on the same page.
Okay, so one on housing, I'd like to put in, the concept of, because we've already as a board given the direction that the physical construction of housing in whatever form that might take is something that the board wants. We've had that discussion several times. What I would say is that I haven't seen. What would be important is, one, the discussion with all of our partners, all from faculty, staff, and everyone, with regard to how that looks and what are some phasing and tiered that we could look at, and what are the formulas that folks are comfortable with. So that part of the process, and also the assessment of our property, is a very, very big deal. And I would just urge that to be at the highest level, because if in a year and a half we decide to move forward, or within 6 months, and we don't have the property analysis done, then we would have wasted a significant amount of time. So that's my concern. One of the final one is with regard to income. Our foundation situation at the district is far from good. A few years ago, and I've been focusing on my concerns about the foundations since I've gotten here, because during times of difficulty, the additional income from the foundations, especially being the second largest center of income of philanthropy in the country, is important. And even though we did a good job of getting the 15 or 30,000 computers and additional money, by not having that infrastructure in place, potentially we left tens of millions of dollars on the table that it could have gone to our students that has nothing to do with our income from state and federal dollars. So the focus on that component of the institution, I want to make sure remains high or stays high or gets in there. I'm not sure if I saw it. That was it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Trustee Bona. So next Hoffman, then Vela, and then I see our student trustee with his hand up. So you're coming afterwards. So Trustee Hoffman.
Thank you, President Veras. So number one, I'd like us to just keep in mind all of the statistics and data that Dr. Pastor showed us this morning. And so as we look at our goals and priorities, I just want to put this on the record that we really need to look at it through the lens of student equity, as well as student success. And I think we've all gotten used to kind of throwing around student success as a cliche, but I truly mean that. And I want to go back to the guided pathways model and make sure that we're including our short-term and long-term CTE programs, transfer, and doing everything that we can to move those students through our institutions. And I also want to come back to something that Trustee Henderson said, and that's this idea of intersectionality. And if we can actually somehow codify that as a goal and a priority, I think that would be really important, as well as our desire to become an anti-racist institution and have all of our colleges focus on building programs that are anti-racist. So that's all I have to say, but I just want to make sure that Noah, when you're kind of putting together these goals and priorities, if we can do it through that lens, I think that would help us all.
Okay, thank you, Trustee. Next I have Vela, then the student trustee, and then Trustee Henderson up next. So Trustee Vela.
Yeah, I think you covered it, President Vettis, very eloquently when you talked about, how we're going to move forward with, let's say, less, students. And I kind of, and I know on priority one, ensuring district sustainability, we say right sizing colleges. And I know, and President Hoffman, I know you've used that term, and it is a term and it's very popular, but I don't really necessarily think it captures all of what encompasses increasing efficiency, eliminating duplication of programs and services. I know that's big when it comes to how we're going to get to a place where we can balance our budget. But I would like to challenge us to kind of put in there, how we expand programs. And I know a lot of people might not believe of, if you put a program together, they will come. Well, a lot of the times that has happened, especially if you look at, and again, we had Dr.
Pastor.
I can't believe it's one of my favorite meats and tacos. I can't believe I can't get that.
We wanted to say that, Trustee Vela, but we didn't want to say it. It's taco.
Unbelievable. Right, exactly. But the demand in healthcare is going to be absolutely a factor, in the future, and it continues to be even today. And so I just want to challenge us a little bit to meet the demand. We have the Olympics in 2028. And so how we expand some of the programs that can, and by the way, everything that also Trustee Fong has said, and Pathways is a big part. I know President Hoffman, some of our students are starting to learn the medical industry in 6th grade due to Pathways, and I really appreciate that. And so incentivizing those. So, and what I'm saying by that is that in the talk about quote unquote right sizing, I'd like to see maybe transfer of resources or, movement of resources as well, to be able to, if we have a staff member, we have a faculty member, can we ask them what other skill sets they have? Because guess what, we're opening another, or expanding, let's say, a nursing program or a hospitality program or so on and so forth. So, and then that way we can grow enrollment and we can grow the synergy of what the local economy, and so if we need to, have a workshop, with a trusted economist we all trust, that, LAECDC or so on and so forth, then we do that. But I just kind of wanted to bridge that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Trustee Vela. So Student Trustee Geronimo.
Hi, I just want to share some thoughts on housing and the AB 705. When we were on campus before the pandemic, I was in student government and used to spend a lot of hours, a lot of time in the office of the ASO. And there we have a small resource room where people donate clothes and everything. So that room is always full of clothes, shoes, or other things. And I used to see a lot of people coming in, asking for things, asking for clothes, and I'm pretty sure they were homeless. A lot of people I used to see. Now during the pandemic, it's a little challenging maybe to reach out to those students who are unhoused due to not having a permanent address. So now it's like, it is a little difficult even for me to kind of also get in touch with those students. And one thing we could maybe provide a better service to those students is like creating maybe a more welcoming campus, since campus is now like the campus, the virtual campus for students. So creating kind of a shell for those resources available. And it was brought to my attention that the Los Angeles Boarding Room, uh, the rooms that they have are still vacant. So there is something that we should have done already in regards to filling out those rooms. And on my end, I will try to do my best at reaching out some students as well by maybe sending emails to them. And also in regards to the AB 705, I do have friends. I don't know if the work done here is like is kind of getting data on how students are doing when they enter community college, how are they taking off from there, if they are being successful or not. So I have some, I come from I come from an adult school, a school where there's a lot of students there, single parents and students who have dropped off high school before and they go back. And in adult school, the math offered there and the English offered there is not the same as the math and English offered in a regular high school, because the math and English are offered by contract and not by direct teaching, So basically what we do there is like kind of grab the contract package from the teacher, and then we go uh, um, assignment by assignment, teaching ourselves, reading the books, by ourselves. We don't have a physical, we don't have a teacher there teaching us on how to do the math, so we have to do it ourselves. And the job of the teacher is just basically grading our work, and that's it. So that's something we could also take into consideration, how other students who come from a place where uh, their education is not same as those who go to a regular high school. So those are the students who might need more help. And I have heard a lot from students that they do struggle when they enter community college, and it's very challenging for them. I was recently contacted by a friend who also decided to go to college, but because, well, of course, the AB 705 takes out that barrier where students have to take the placement test, but this student actually decided to take ESL 8 because she said that she didn't feel comfortable in taking English 101. I don't know why, but and how other students also coming from there that asking what would be the best, like taking English 101 or starting from ESL. So uh, if there is a data that shows that students are really struggling with taking off where they want, I think there should be a kind of more, let's say, more tutoring programs for those students. who are struggling with math and English. So those are my two thoughts on, and thank you.
Okay, thank you, student trustee. Trustee Henderson.
Thank you, President Veras. Again, General, I just want to highlight some points that trustees Vela and Fong made in their comments, that while we are focusing on timelines and including who and on what level we are tackling these items, but to also, if this final document could, in addition to having, I think it was the action steps and indicators, if there could be specific bullet points as to what we are expecting or planning to do in relation to who would be doing it, so that, as this is a working document, so that in the next iteration of this, when we are reviewing it, we're not just looking at the status as being completed overall for that item. We can look at it in terms of the specific things that we had set out to do and determine whether or not they were completed or in progress.
Yes, I believe that's that would be generally interest, and so even in the priority level, the board BSA average, that's something we added on here as a sort of continuing. It's imperfect, but we were trying to, the goal is to try to connect these documents to our assessment documents so that we know that there's an intimate connection, immediate connection with the tools that we're putting out to assess, with the goals and objectives we put out ahead of time. But yeah, some of the comments and some of the mentions that were made, they're ongoing, in progress. Even though if we say it's complete, it still has the continuing effort that needs to take place, and we can see that as continuing effort and continuing prioritization for development and advancement here. So so yes, absolutely. So trustee, any other comments or feedback? Okay.
No, that was it. Thank you.
Perfect. So we're a few minutes over our agendized window here, but I wanted to check in real quick with, and again, this is our living, breathing document, and it's not going to be static. We're going to want to continue to do this and develop this, and in terms of next steps, I'll work with our chancellor and Noah in terms of taking in the feedback, the comments, getting us our working document. And then also providing the spaces where we can, reform, modify, and dig deeper or change in those kinds of spaces. But I know, trustee, now I saw your hand go up, so let's get to your hand, and then I'll leave it to final comment from Noah and Francisco, and then we'll be ready to adjourn.
So actually, this is about Noah. Noah, that probably sounded worse than I meant it. In terms of the analysis, I like the way it's being it's structured here, and I think and I agree with Trustee Henderson with regard to more detail. So when we look at it, because we're not looking at it all this time, we have a sense of an immediate reference so that we can then make an assessment, right? But what I think would be helpful, and again, it goes with my biggest concern. Every single entity that is out there, whether for-profit, government, corporation, gets outside assistance. And what I think might be helpful is, again, there are best practices and information that are out there that's happening with the community college world that we shouldn't be guessing at. And I think our team within LACCD, they're busy operating the institution. However, ACCT has the lens of being able to understand trends. What might be helpful is for ACCT specifically to tell us things that are going well and not so well, based on their best information available. That analysis component is the most important. I mean, not the most important, but it's an extremely valuable added on component that if we don't have, I feel we'll be losing something. Thank you.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you. I do have one request from our public here, and I know it's a small group. I'm happy to accommodate, and obviously it's a partner for us. So If we can add Joanne Waddell from our president of our faculty guild here for a comment or question. Joanne, can you hear me? Are you available? I think you've been shifted over here. You can unmute and ask your question or make your comment.
You hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So thank you for calling on me, and thank you for including us in this very rich and broad discussion. And I think given the time that we have right now, I'll just say that the Faculty Guild looks forward to having continued conversations with the trustees about these many items. Thank you.
Thank you, Joanne. Again, this document is a public document, and we like to think of it as a living document. So we're going to keep improving on it and take the next steps forward here to make sure that we can use this as a guide for our work and our efforts here. So Noah, last comments, Francisco, last comments, and then we'll move to it. Or actually, Trustee Vela, I see your hands up again.
Yeah, I apologize. Yeah, I apologize for just quick. I just don't want to forget. With the innovation of expanding new programs that we mentioned in health and hospitality and all that, also really looking at our earning potential after they leave us. And I think we mentioned it, I just don't know where. So I just wanted to kind of harp on that. Okay, thank you.
Can I just take 5 seconds?
A new hand? Yeah, it's a new hand. Go ahead.
Yeah, 5 seconds. Is there any way that we could have a column for our partner opinions? You know, just like President Waddell said with regard to the faculty, but the staff and opinions, including with that, are there any counter dissent opinions that might be helpful that are evaluated not by us, but by the team, so that as we're getting it, we understand and the various positions, even if they don't agree, are there. That way, if some of our partners speaking maybe not are able to articulate it at that particular point or fast enough. That's it.
Okay, that's certainly something to ask. Maybe a survey opportunity or something out there before we go a little more firm, just to get a sense as to thoughts and process here.
Okay.
So Noah, last comments, and then Francisco, wrap comment, and then we'll go to adjournment.
Yeah, thank you, President Veras, and thank you, board members. This was very instructive, and you're on track. This is exactly what you should be doing. So all I will say is I took copious notes. There's a lot of areas I think that need to be nuanced, and I tried to write down as many of those as possible. I think there were some comments related to the structure. I really like the idea of differentiating between what is district level versus perhaps college level on some of these areas. I think it's important to understand those differences where they occur. But what I will do is, as President Veras indicated, we'll work with him and the Chancellor to make numerous revisions to this and try to add in a lot of the things that you've mentioned. I do agree absolutely with Trustee Moreno and others who have spoken to this, that the board really needs to start thinking about and establishing some guidelines relative to how business is going to be changing in the district. This gets right to the point of sustainability. So I'm happy to work with you all to try to help you understand and define sort of what those operating principles may look like. You know, like you, ACCT was fortunate to be the recipient of money through the CARES program through a payroll protection plan grant, which was great. But that money's temporary. And so what happens when the money goes away? Just like in the district, when the CARES goes away and the CRISA funds go away, you're going to get another big package potentially in another week or two from a fourth stimulus package, which is great. But you have to make plans now for how you're going to supplant those kinds of income supports and keep the district moving forward. So again, I want to thank all of you for your contributions, incredibly helpful. And we will do our best to try to capture this and give it back to you as soon as we can.
Okay, thank you. Chancellor?
Sure, let me provide, thank the board for their full time and attention and engagement this morning. It's been an excellent morning, and assured that the staff has been listening carefully. We will continue the work. I wanted to point out that there will be multiple opportunities for the board to continue to weigh in on these very important subjects. We do have our monthly committee meetings in which several of these topic subjects are indeed covered. We will show what we're doing by way of dashboards and other kinds of ways that we monitor in real time our progress on a whole series of goals, referring to our strategic planning process and other areas in which we keep ongoing attention. So that's something that we'll be mindful of in that particular board committee structure. And as you've seen, Mr. Vettis and the board, we will also have monthly potential conversations on topical areas that are of interest, and several came up today from the standpoint of support, reflection, strategy, and ultimately implementation. So again, multiple opportunities. This document is, as was mentioned, living, breathing, but we want to capture what's of most interest to the board to work on this particular year, what we've carried over from last year, and will be some goals moving forward. A community college district of the 21st century must be agile, nimble, opportunistic, and strategic, and we will do all of that, positioning our district moving forward for our fiscal health and for ultimately supporting families and communities that this district serves. And I thought that this morning's conversation gave us a real glimpse of today and tomorrow. So again, thank you all for your attention. We'll do further refinement and look forward to the next iteration of this.
Okay, thank you, Chancellor, and colleagues. If there's no objections, let's stand adjourned.
Thank you, President Veras. Have a good weekend, everyone.